welcome to part 2 of this discussion on the Peter Capaldi era. Last time we spent a lot more time than I thought we would on talking about Series 8. But I think it was honestly all the better for it. I thought we had a very interesting discussion that led to some interesting avenues that really got me and some of the viewers thinking. Hopefully you too.
Yeah, man.
So if anyone is clicking on this and doesn't know what I'm talking about, you have to go and check out part 1 first, because that's where me and Adam discussed that, and this is kind of a sequel to that. Though, having said that, if you're just interested in hearing people talk about Series 9, then I suppose you could just jump right into this. But for context, we are following up on things that were said in that video, so there are things that we may refer to that were brought up last time. But yeah, so we're going to dive into Series 9 this time. I think this will be very interesting. The main reason why is probably because if I were to hazard a guess, it might be the one we have the most disagreement on.
Probably, yeah. I mean, Series 9, from what we see in, fan communities and stuff, is quite divisive anyway, at the best of times. So, yeah, I think you're right.
I mean, I have lost count the amount of times I've seen someone say it's either the best ever or the worst ever. It's really divisive.
Yeah.
But I think the important thing to do is, obviously we're going to go into what we think of it, but also dive into why it's so divisive. I think will be the most interesting thing. So, I think, considering that we sort of gave some brief thoughts at the start of part 1, which when we sort of went through the episodes, I suppose we could just dive straight into something specific. So, the first thing that comes to mind when someone says Series 9 is the shift in the Doctor's character. This is something that whenever someone talks about Capaldi, the 12th Doctor, or just the Capaldi era in general, this is probably the thing I hear the most discussion about, is the shift between Series 8 and 9 in terms of the way he's characterized. And so, judging at surface level, which is what I think a lot of people do, not necessarily that it's a bad thing, but it's what a lot of people do, it appears that he has transitioned from the very quite, brusque and edgy Time Lord character that he was. Though, having said that, there are a couple of moments in Series 8 that do sort of lead into where he goes. Like, you get that scene in Death in Heaven where he says, "I'm an idiot in a box."
Yeah.
And obviously, there is Last Christmas, which is in between. But speaking specifically about, Magician's Apprentice as the main one, the big moment where you see the hardest shift is when he comes riding on a tank playing guitar, and he has a completely different costume on, and it's almost unrecognizable compared to where he was in Series 8. This is one of the most divisive scenes, I think, because it's like, on one side, you have the people that really don't like the scene. I think when it first came out, I was into it, but ever since then, I have soured on it. But basically what it is that the people that don't like it say, firstly, they say the shift is unearned and is too harsh. Mm-hmm. And the second thing is probably more personal taste, is they just find the Rocker Doctor quite cringe, almost like the Doctor's having a midlife crisis, and it's kind of embarrassing. Yeah. And that's kind of where it all stems from, obviously at the end of part 2, the sonic sunglasses get brought into it as well.
Yes, the one of the most divisive elements of Series 9, arguably.
I mean, the sonic screwdriver is already controversial, and now you've got...
True, that is true.
And now you've got sonic shades. This is probably the first thing I would like to discuss, is this shift in his character. So, seeing as from what I can gather is you're most likely a fan of this, I would be interested to hear your thoughts on this shift.
Sure. Well, at first, like yourself, when it first broadcast, because I remember watching it, I found it, on broadcast, I found it quite cool, because I wasn't expecting it. The whole scenery of it, if you like, the Doctor coming out on a tank playing guitar, it was pretty cool. But I do feel like you say it is one of those, you see it once and you're like, oh, that's neat, but then when you on rewatch, it's sort of like, oh. And that whole thing, it's one of the few things of Series 9 I think was a big sort of not a misstep, because this idea, right, of the Doctor having a midlife crisis, like you said, or, having this complete tonal shift, I think is fine in concept. I think it's a good concept. I'm all for, tipping a character on its head. But I do agree with those people who say I wish we'd sort of seen more of that shift leading up to this, because it's assuming, obviously time's passed between even Last Christmas and Magician's Apprentice, but there's not really any. I feel like we don't get any sort of, big context as to why he's now like this compared to before.
From what I can understand, from how it's been explained, and also on rewatching the story, it seems like the reason why he's doing this is because he's had his death foreshadowed, which isn't inherently a bad idea. The only thing about that I think really rankles me and other people the wrong way is that we've seen this so many times before in New Who, because we got this with the 10th Doctor in the specials, and then we had it with Matt Smith in Series 6 and Series 7, and so to have it again just feels tiresome, if you know what I mean.
No, yeah, I agree. And some people say, oh, well, it makes sense that he stays sort of a bit more jolly after Series 9 because he's averted his death. And I'm like, okay, fine, but surely it made more sense, because in Series 8, the whole thing, like we said in the last video we did, was, the whole am I a good man trope, which we discussed at length. And I always felt in Death in Heaven, like you said, that moment when he goes, I'm an idiot in a box, that almost felt like his sort of vindication, if that makes sense, like to that question. But that didn't instantly mean he shifted from being this grumpy, spiky character to being, really jolly. Like in Last Christmas, we see it. Even though he's had that vindication, he's still very rough around the edges, not in a bad way, but you know what I mean? He's still very spiky as a character. So
I mean, when I watched that episode, I could just imagine Malcolm Tucker telling Santa to fuck off.
Yeah, which would have been absolutely brilliant. But I kind of like that in Last Christmas, especially I remember when it went out, because I did even think after Death in Heaven, I thought, oh well, he's had this vindication of the am I a good man, so now is it all going to shift? But I always remember when he sees Clara in Last Christmas, when they're on the roof and he goes, I want you to get in the TARDIS, I don't want you to talk, just do it now. It's still very much that Series 8 rough, spiky, doesn't really care about how he comes across sort of thing. So I feel like the shift to this more midlife crisis-y, a bit more relaxed, is fine. I actually think, we'll discuss this, I'm sure, in another video, but how he is in Series 10 on the whole, I feel like that was in the right place. Like, by Series 10, I was like, it makes sense. Whereas Series 9, I always felt should have been a sort of middle ground between how Series 9 should have been the whole transition, if that makes sense, rather than us starting Series 9 and the transition's almost already done to that midlife crisis-y phase, if that makes sense.
It's very jarring, I think.
Yeah. Especially if you've just done, like I did a whole Series 8 rewatch at the time before Series 9 debuted, and I was like, oh, okay. And I'm not saying this in a derogatory way, because I know there's like a lot of fans of this era, but like when I watch that scene now, it feels very Matt Smith.
Yeah.
And I'm not saying that as a dig. Like, I'm sure if Matt Smith did that, I'd still probably find it cool on broadcast, but it feels like Moffat is not necessarily reusing old tropes, but like he's reusing elements that would have fit in the Matt Smith era, or maybe ideas that maybe he had for that era and just never got round to.
I would say Series 9 has he brings back some of those like quippy elements I found from Smith's era, which in terms of like a marketing standpoint is a bit of a letdown, because when Series 8 was coming out, Moffat said this is going to be the biggest shift in Modern Who. And that being said, Series 9, in terms of like the actual core text, is quite different to the Smith era in terms of the way it handles its storytelling, which we'll get to.
Oh, sure.
But just talking about like the more like surface level entertainment side of it, he brings back a lot of that sort of whimsicalness of Smith's era, and I just felt like it wasn't needed, and I didn't think it really suited Capaldi that much to me.
No, and that's why by contrast, I think, like we said last time, partly why I enjoyed Series 8 so much, that we did away with a lot of the and again, for people who didn't see that video, I do think Doctor Who can be whimsical. I'm not saying it can't be whimsical. Absolutely. I don't. I just think having had the Matt Smith era where whimsy was sort of one of the core factors, going for that bigger shift to, it's not realism, but just more of like a harder edge.
Well, funnily enough, this is actually something because I'm a big fan. I know you're not the biggest fan, but I'm a big fan of Tom Baker's era. And one part of it that really resonates with me is that, because like I find the Graham Williams era like a lot of fun to watch, similar to how there's a lot of people that find the Matt Smith era fun to watch. It's not, I wouldn't say pulpy is quite the right word, but it's very whimsical. And then when you get the shift to season 18, it still has some of those elements in it, but there is a darker edge to the Fourth Doctor in that season, and part of it's due to, you know, it basically they go into the whole thing of he can feel the entropy of the universe turning to chaos, and he can't quite handle it, and then obviously he has his death foreshadowed by the Watcher and all that, and I find that shift really fascinating, and so like it's sort of like a similar thing with Capaldi, where it's like it's not like there isn't any whimsy at all in Series 8, because there is some, but but the shift makes it very interesting because it adds more texture, if you know what I mean.
Yeah, and I think like Series 9 as a whole, like we'll get into it more as we go, but like the whole, I even remember the trailer, and I think Moffat actually went on record later on and said the way or at least the UK trailer was handled he didn't like, because I always remember they used that line from The Witch is Familiar, you know, near the end when the Doctor and Clara are facing down the Daleks in like their control room, and he goes, oh, you know, same old, the Doctor and Clara in the TARDIS, you know, and then it materializes around them. That was used in the like UK trailer for Series 9, and I just remember thinking like, it felt like a Matt Smith era trailer, and it didn't really, I thought this isn't going to entice potentially new people, because you're saying, oh, it's the same, you know, it's same old.
Do you think part of that might be the BBC thinking that Series 8 was the wrong direction?
Well, because this is often brought up, isn't it? It's like this, did they think it was... Because the BBC's been a bit funny with Capaldi.
I don't know the answer to that. I don't know if it was Moffat or the BBC or both. I have no idea.
Yeah, I'd like to think, well, out of those two specific, if you had to sort of pick between Moffat and the BBC, I'd be more inclined to say it was the BBC, because I think Moffat, as much as like a controversial writer as he is, and like I have my bits where I applaud him and bits where I don't, I'd like to think once he sort of sets in, you know, line like a character, like what a character is in his run, he likes to stick with it or like take time to build it. And as we said, the shift between Series 8 and 9, for Moffat standards, is very jarring and very sudden. He usually likes to build it up. So I'd be more inclined to say maybe the BBC might... again, I don't know for sure, but they might have said something, because obviously Series 8 as well, it sounds insignificant to some, but it was on in the UK at a much later time than Doctor Who had been at that point. So from New Who, I'd say, up until about the Matt Smith era, it was always sort of on about 7 p.m, which was like, you know, the prime slot. But with Series 8, it was, I can't even remember why. I think it was because Strictly Come Dancing was on or something like that.
Yeah.
It got moved to like 8 p.m, 8:20. I think the latest one was like 8:35, which doesn't sound that late, but for Doctor Who, like, you know, that's the latest a new episode went out on transmission, like going into 9 p.m. And obviously a lot of kids aren't going to be watching live at that point, and there was some, not loads, but, you know, some comments I think we said last time about the level of darkness, if you like, you know, particularly the whole dark water stuff, the don't cremate me sort of thing. So maybe the BBC, you know, took all that to heed and thought, this needs to be a bit, you know, sort of like the end of the Hinchcliffe and Holmes era in Tom Baker's time. You know how they were sort of told, or like they buckled under the pressure and said, right, we've got to...
Mary Whitehouse was not happy with season 14 at all, especially because of Deadly Assassin.
No.
And so that then you get season 50, which has this very bizarre like blend of both. It's this weird...
Yeah, because you've got like Horror of Fang Rock and Image of the Fendal, which feel very season 13 and 14.
Yeah.
Like, you know, that very gothic thing. But then
like,
you've also got
Invisible Enemy,
you know,
and like in Sunmakers are like very Williams
and Underworld and things like that. Yeah,
it's so odd. It's really that season has a really odd tone, because it's like a transition between 14 and 16, and it's kind of bizarre.
Yeah, and I think Series 9 might have suffered, again, I don't know for certain, but I wouldn't, if it came out that the BBC had sort of sat Moffat down and had like a little word of like, you need to brighten this up, that wouldn't surprise me, do you know what I mean? I wouldn't be like, wow, shock horror.
Funnily enough, Season 15 and Series 9 both have like a controversial Gallifrey finale as well.
Oh, and we'll get to that, don't you worry.
We will.
Yes.
But yeah, But anyway, so yeah, it's a strange vibe because Series 9 to me has like there's part of it that is very Moffat wants to do art house Doctor Who, but then the other half of it seems like BBC interference, and I can't quite put my finger on where which one dominates more because it seems like it's a bit of both, and it's odd.
And I feel where Moffat tries to win through on terms of the 12th Doctor's character in Series 9 is there is still some of that Series 8 spikiness there. Like, I'm not saying it's gone completely, but it now feels like Moffat can only bring it out when the 12th Doctor's angry, which is fine, because,
I think one of the biggest differences is that he's not taking that anger out on Clara anymore. It's more on like adversaries and like situations. Whereas in Series 8, he would actually take it out on her because they had obviously a battling relationship. Whereas Series 9, especially post Last Christmas, they seem to have bonded much stronger, which is intentional because it means that when you get to her exit, it means that them ripping apart is more impactful. Because if they were arguing before that, it would be weird.
No, completely. I don't mind the shift with Clara. As I say, it makes her exit feel more, I guess, more connected to us as an audience. But I mean, just with general people, not even adversaries, like the side characters. One of the things I enjoyed in Series 8 was he was almost very hesitant when he met anyone, or very spiky with them.
I love when he meets Robin Hood. That's great.
Yeah, exactly. That's brilliant. And I think Series 8, for the most part, handled it in such a way where the 12th Doctor doesn't come across as a dick. He's actually quite funny when he's spiky to these people. And I just feel a lot of that, which was set up to be like, right, this is a part of who the 12th Doctor is, just inherently. It felt like a lot of that was gone in Series 9. But again, like for not much of a justified reason, I suppose.
It's I think the one of the biggest shifts in terms of like comedy is that in Series 8, he was often the funniest person. Whereas in Series 9, he's kind of the butt of the joke, which is very different. Like if you think about you think about like him making comments about Clara being short and having a weird nose and all that, like it's him very much being like playfully insulting, and it's kind of him just being a bit moody. Whereas in something like The Woman Who Lived, it's a Shielder making a joke about how he looks like he could be a dad or something, and it's more like the joke's on him.
Yeah, which, I don't know. So some of them land, some of them don't. I mean, like Capaldi is a funny actor. Like we've seen him do comedy in a range of styles. Like I just think it's like I always said about the Matt Smith era. The actors for the most part are great. It's just sometimes the writing or the constraints they have to work under because of the writing.
I do think Capaldi is great when the writing does it a certain way. But I will say, some of the Dr. Disco stuff in Series 9 does make me cringe.
Oh, I've got a soft spot for I don't even know why. It just makes me chuckle. Like, I can understand why it makes you cringe. Like, I'm not saying it's not cringeworthy, but I don't know. I think my knee-jerk... Maybe it's because I'm cringe as well. My knee-jerk is to be like, I don't know. It made me chuckle. My friends at the time were like, "Oh my god!" But I was like, "Nah, this is cool, man. Leave Capaldi alone."
Well,
I mean,
okay, but how do you feel about the browser history jokes?
Okay, yeah, but that's more. I'd argue that's more a Moffat. Moffat loved the browser history joke.
Absolutely, yeah.
And it was funny. It was funny in 2010, in the 11th hour. He got it in his first episode.
Well, but it's a weird inconsistency because in that one he's telling Jeff to get a girlfriend because of that, whereas in here it's assuming that the Doctor's the one looking at it. So it's like
but also I'd argue like it's just not funny. Like it might be funny when because I probably found it funny in the 11th hour. I was 14. That's like the prime age where a browser history joke is probably going to be funny because you're probably ribbing your mates for doing the same thing. But when by the time Capaldi, I'm 18, 19, it's a bit like, oh, this joke's pretty.
Well,
cringe.
I mean, the Matt Smith era is quite raunchy in a way that a 14-year-old would enjoy. Let's be honest.
That's a perfect analogy. It's a perfect analogy.
Yes. Yeah. I mean,
and it makes.
I just have a funny feeling that when Moffat was running some of those episodes, he was just like, "What would I do if I was 14? What would I want to see?"
Well, he got his wish on many fronts, but Yeah, it's yes, yeah. I'll admit, like Doctor Who and comedy, like I think throughout all its history, sometimes it does it really, really well, and then sometimes it just it falls flat. Like I think we can all throw our hands up and agree. Like,
obviously, some of it is also the fact that like comedy is quite subjective due to the fact that it relies on your life experience. So there's certain things that you're gonna like and certain things that other people are gonna like.
Yeah, absolutely, but. Can we all just agree browser history jokes are not funny? Can we all collectively agree, please?
I mean, we'll get into when we get to series 10. But man, when he had the first when he had the first Doctor doing the browser history joke, it's like he just couldn't resist it, could he?
He was just, it's my last episode. Do I do it? Oh, and he's just typing on the keyboard like, oh, there it is.
Yeah. But, anyway, but that's just like it's a small moment, so I can look past it. But yes, Capaldi becomes a rock star in series 9.
Hell yeah.
Hell yeah. And I think this has some positives and some negatives. I think probably my favorite thing about it is the Before the Flood title sequence, and now it has like a rock version. I really like that.
Yes, that's cool. That's sick. Yeah. That whole little pre-sequence. I know some people don't like it because it obviously is breaking the fourth wall, but I loved it. Like I like shit like that.
Yeah, and it's also because his Doctor is quite philosophical. Having a sort of guitar with him sort of adds a sort of background instrumental to everything he's talking about. So it allows him to be able to sort of turn his theories into music, which I understand. I can sort of see why the appeal behind that. Especially like, talking about Beethoven and all that, it kind of makes sense to add a guitar in that. But yeah, I can't quite put my finger on why, but there's something about that part of his character that just doesn't click with me. And it's weird because I really like music. I'm a big fan of rock music in general, but I don't know.
Is it again? Is it? Do you think maybe again? It's because this shift, this appearance has literally come out of nowhere.
Maybe, but then again, I'm just thinking like, would I still like it if it was like his first season? I'm not sure.
I think there needed to be some change. I'm not saying like the whole point of characters in dramas, I guess, like this is that they progress, they change over time, and I'm not saying that Capaldi in series 9 should have been exactly the same as he was in series 8, but I just feel like there could have been more of a middle ground, sort of between what we got in series 8 and 9 rather than what we did get, I guess. It's sort of like, still have him be spiky, but maybe have him realize along the way that he doesn't, he doesn't always need to be like this, or moments that make him real, that actively spark a change or a development in his character rather than what we get. Like Moffat might have had this all planned out in his head, and he might have, written out, this is how the Doctor's transition between, Last Christmas and The Magician's Apprentice, which is fine. But if we don't see it, or if we don't get a quote-unquote justified explanation, then it just feels a bit hollow. Like, I know, like you said, it's this whole thing of the Doctor finds out he's going to die, the confession dial, it's all that. But does that, again, the trope's been used before, like we said, so it doesn't feel, like, revolutionary or anything. Mm-hmm. And again, I think it is just too jarring. It is too... And I know that people say there's those little prequels, that were in cinemas or something before... I can't remember what they're called, but do you know what I mean? Like where he's with the people of the time, and when you watch those, like he is like series 9 Capaldi. He's more relaxed, and I feel if they probably obviously didn't do it because of time, but if the Doctor's Meditations just come out to me, that's what it's called. But if they'd have had that, in The Magician's Apprentice as well, at least we would have had more time to get accustomed to this new, rather than him just appear on a tank and
it's interesting to think about that, because like that whole episode builds up like a prog rock song, and it's I've actually heard a lot of people say they don't like that because they think it wastes a lot of time, because that does, when you think about it, that whole episode goes around doing a whole lot of things, and then they don't get to Skaro until like the very end, and then you get the actual Skaro story in the second part. But thinking about it, I almost feel like maybe it was intended to be, when you get like a prog rock song and it like slowly builds up. It's just, I like that idea. I like that idea. I'm just not 100% sure on what they actually used to build it up, to be honest.
I mean, I like that sort of analogy in the same way with, just again, link it to Classic Who. You know, Revelation of the Daleks, the Colin Baker story?
Yeah.
Like, a lot of criticisms that story has is that in part one, the Sixth Doctor and Perry spend pretty much all of it getting to tranquil repose, which is true. You know, we end part one and they've just arrived. I don't see that as a negative. I actually see it as a positive, because what I love about part one of that story is we get this whole, you know, world building about what tranquil repose is and how Davros has established himself. Like, just it's that thing of just because it's called Doctor Who, like, yes, obviously that he needs to feature, but like he doesn't always have to be. I kind of like it occasionally, you know, when he's not front and center, sort of like modern day with episodes like Blink or Turn Left or things like that.
Yeah, of course.
So that's why I like Revelation Part 1, and I kind of like that about The Magician's Apprentice. How, like you say, there is a build. Like, I think by this point, I think we knew the Daleks were going to be in it. I think that had been like teased in trailers or whatever.
Yeah.
So we knew that was coming, but I kind of like the build to it happening, like you're saying. It's not the strongest build, I'll give you that. You know, it's not.
Well, I think the difference between that and Revelation is that it's not really building the setting we're about to go to. It's more building things that lead up to the setting, if that makes sense.
Yes. Yeah. No, completely. And I don't know why. Because, Unit's in it in Magician's Apprentice, aren't they? And I don't really know why they're there, apart from getting Clara to meet up with Missy, which is a great scene, by the way. I love that scene of those two in the square.
Well, that's the bit where all the planes stop, right?
Yeah, and I just feel like, I don't know, Unit. Like, I love Unit anyway, but I just feel like they serve much better a purpose in the later Zygon two-parter than they arguably do. Because
that's actually a Unit story.
Well, quite, yeah. I feel Moffat was just like, oh, something's happening on Earth. It's weird. Unit, you know, we know them. So, also I think they do Gemma Redgrave, you know, Kate Stewart in The Magician's Apprentice. She's sort of done a disservice. There's that scene everyone quotes where they've got Clara, you know, and they're in their mobile HQ or whatever, and they're trying to pinpoint what's going on, basically. And what does she say? They're like, oh, that's a lot of planes. And Clara goes, oh, and a lot of fuel. And Kate's like, oh my God, yes it is. Like, she'd never thought of it. And it's just like, you're the head of the of Unit, and you're being upstaged by, I know it's the Doctor's companion, but essentially a school teacher.
Well, I mean,
I just feel, I feel Kate was done a disservice.
I suppose you could lead that into what this series is doing with Clara's character. And also, to be fair, they did do it in series 7 and 8 as well, but there is a point. Yeah,
for Clara's character, I get it. Yeah,
there is a point made that Clara is trying to become like the Doctor, and therefore it's presenting her intelligence as almost equal to him. And therefore, if she were to have a scene with Kate Stewart, it would be like if the Doctor was there with Kate Stewart. If that makes sense, I think that's kind of what they were going for.
I think that makes sense for Clara's character, but I think it's just that they make the way Kate Stewart's written in that scene makes her look like an idiot, which I don't agree with.
Yeah, like, I think it should have been. It should have been more about having a way for Clara's point of view to point out something that Unit wouldn't get, as opposed to making Kate less intelligent to show that Clara knows an answer. If you know what I mean.
Exactly, because like the Brigadier, you know, there were moments where he's made to look an idiot, but I'd argue it's never at the insult of his intelligence. It's just more his like outlook on things or life or whatever. Whereas I find it hard to believe the head of the United Nations Intelligence Task Force wouldn't see loads of planes in the sky and not think about the fuel. You know, have that not be an occurrence until Clara points it out.
Like say for example, there was some event on where like schools were going on like a big trip somewhere, and then she pointed out, oh yes, what about all the, you know, the students that are on those planes? And obviously she like Unit might not know about that, and that would be something that Clara knows that they don't. Like that again, that's an example of something that they could have done. Yeah,
I just Unit didn't. I mean, I don't know. I just don't think Unit really needed to necessarily be there for this story.
Yeah.
But you know they are, which is fine. But I mean, once we get to Skaro and all that, and setting up for the second part, if you don't mind, I'm curious to know, like, because I think one of the big things about The Witch's Familiar is how, I guess, Dalek lore is changed / introduced. I'm mainly talking about when Clara's about to get in, when she's inside the Dalek, and the whole like translation thing. What's your thoughts on that?
Well, I suppose best place to start is to clarify exactly what happened so there isn't confusion. From my understanding of watching the episode, it retcons what happens when a Dalek is inside its shell. And you get a scenario where the outer shell translates love to exterminate is what happens, right? And so that's one thing. And then there's also some of the stuff with Davros as well, which I think we'll get to. I mean, it has been, to be fair, it has been about 2 years since I've watched the story. I do remember it very vividly, but it has been about 2 years, so I may forget some details.
Sure.
But from what I remember, I wasn't a fan of some of the things that they did with the Daleks and with Davros in that story.
At the time, in 2015, I thought it was, like a lot of things, I think, you know, when you see them for the first time, when you don't know they're coming, I was like, it's an interesting idea. Like, you know, it's something different. I think there's moments where it works to its benefit, mainly near the end when the Clara Dalek is facing the Doctor and she's just trying to tell him that it's her and it's not coming out that way.
Yeah.
Like, I actually think that works really well as like a point of dramatic tension. But yeah, like the rest of it, the whole translating love to when it's, I just think I don't know what Moffat thought he was trying to do with it, because I'd argue actually it takes a lot away from what the Daleks are as a species.
Absolutely.
Because like when they were first designed, and like it got forgotten in Classic Who a lot as well, but like they are meant to be very intelligent, very manipulative, very like cunning, conniving beings as creatures. And like, yeah, I know in the end in Classic Who, like, especially when Davros came along, they were sort of just, you know, relegated to being like grunts who just screamed all the time. But, you know, I think even in New Who, when it kicked off in like things like Dalek and stuff like that, you know, we got more of that manipulativeness again. And I don't know, just the idea that all of that connivingness and cunningness is controlled just by the outer shell and not the actual creature inside removes a lot of agency from the Daleks as a species.
I absolutely agree. And
I think it would have been... Sorry, I thought it would have been better if... Because Clara is entering it, you know, not as a Khalid mutant, as a fully fledged humanoid.
Yeah.
I thought it would have been more interesting if maybe when she plugged herself in, all the hardware that's wired into him, because we do know that, you know, the mutant's hardwired in somehow. Because Clara's thoughts are going to be so wildly different to a Khalid mutant. If it had been written that the system inside the Dalek shell didn't know how to cope with it properly, or, you know, maybe mistranslated things. Do you know what I mean? Something like that, because it was a different being.
Well, actually,
I think that might have made more sense.
Well, actually, if you did that, it would be foreshadowing for the hybrid arc, actually, if you think about it.
Yeah, exactly.
But what I was going to say is it's not... Because I agree with you absolutely on the whole thing of it removing agency from the Daleks, which is really unfortunate. But also, there's another element to that I really don't like, is that by having it be that the Daleks are saying that they love you, instead of it being translated to exterminate, it's something that I have a massive issue with over Moffat's era. It's more so with Smith than Capaldi, but it's definitely throughout Capaldi as well at points, and definitely in this story, is that it superimposes overly sentimental ideas onto characters and bits of lore that aren't that. There's just something about Moffat's writing where he wants everything to be really, really saccharine, and that's really off-putting for me. And I can understand him doing it with his own like creations. Like if you think about the first episode that really establishes that theme in his era is The Beast Below, and I personally don't particularly like it, but because what he's doing is he's doing it with his own Doctor and his own companion and this new set of characters and like the Starwell and whatnot, I can be more forgiving of it because it's not something that's been established, it's something that's new, and so he's putting his own ideas into its own little circle. Whereas what he's doing here is he's putting these ideas on the Daleks and Davros, which is something that's already been established, is something completely different. And I think it's a really disgraceful retcon to do that.
Yeah, I mean, again, like I think, like what we got on screen, this concept of like the outer shell translates things. Like again, like I think had it been handled in a different way, sort of like we said, maybe it because Clara's not a Khalid mutant, it reacts in that way. I feel then maybe it would have been more justified, because I think the idea is it's an interesting idea that the casing has some impact, but I don't think it should be put down completely.
Yeah.
The casing shouldn't make the Dalek.
I would say I think you could get away with it if the casing encouraged the Dalek to become more angry, in the sense of
if it heightened those emotions.
Imagine if the truth is that the Dalek inside is, possibly imagine that scene in Our World Enough in Time where the half converted Cybermen are saying pain, kill me, whatever. If it was more like the Dalek inside its casing was living this sort of existence of suffering and wanted help in some way or another, but then the casing kicks in and it turns it into this just really angry wrecking ball, I think that would have been that could have been interesting. And it may have removed a little bit of agency, but it would have made them a really interesting, relatable villain, because and again, it would tie back to things that Rob Sherman did in Dalek, of the Dalek inside doesn't want to be like this, but it has all these genetic codes that tell it to be this angry and this murderous thing, and the casing just reinforces it. I think that could have been really interesting, but instead what we got was what we got, and I wasn't a fan.
And all the jokes of people saying, so every time in the show when the Daleks say exterminate, they're just saying, I love you.
Yeah, I know, it's just...
over and over again.
Yeah,
no, I know. I think my concluding thoughts on it is just again, the idea, the concept is interesting, but it just wasn't put to... it just wasn't executed in the best way.
Also, let's not forget again, this is just a one-off little moment, but for some reason it always sticks with me. Is that bit where Missy tickles a Dalek's balls?
Oh yeah.
And I'm like, okay, that is in character, but it's very that. I feel like this episode got to a point where it became like Curse of Fatal Death, but unironic, if you know what I mean.
Yeah. Yeah, so you saw it and you just sort of slapped your knee and went, "Oh, Moffat!"
I've seen some people describe this story as fan fiction, and I honestly don't necessarily disagree. I think there is definitely some element of that in which is familiar.
I mean, you've got the every Dalek ever thing again, but for no real reason.
Yeah, and then you've got the bit where the Doctor steals Davros's wheelchair and is like, "Who's ready for Dodgems?"
Yeah, which is morally questionable when you think about it. It's okay, but so I mean, so how do you feel Davros then was represented in all this?
Okay, this is a complex one. This is a really complex one. So, but the first thing I will say is I think the performances are outstanding from Gillian Bleach and Peter Capaldi. It's some of the best acting I think New Who's ever had. I thought it at the time, and I still think it now. I also think and this is also something that we're going to get back to when we get to the Zygon two-parter as well, if you strip out the scenes that they have together in The Witch is Familiar that are really hard and tender, and have it as this isolated clip, on YouTube or something, it would appear to be this just absolutely monumental scene. If I just look at it in isolation, it appears that way, and it seems like it's this really, really good scene. But then when I think about it in context of the whole story, the fact that none of it was actually true and they were just tricking each other really lets me down, and I don't like that. Yeah,
the whole trick thing. The part of me thinks again, it could have been done, but I feel like you would, no matter what, if you were sticking to that episode's runtime, it was always going to be a bit rushed, because it is, it's literally Davros is like, haha, I got you, and then the Doctor's like, lol, joke's on you, I got you instead. Do you know what I mean? It's very quick and easy. Whereas I almost felt like Moffat thought, because the idea of Davros genuinely asking for help or genuinely wanting to see the son before his death, I haven't got a problem with. I actually really like that. Whereas with the Dalek, it might be a bit more, it might be a bit weird. But with Davros, because he's more humanoid, if you like, he's got a wider gamut of emotions than arguably the Daleks themselves do. I feel it's a really interesting idea, especially with such an iconic villain. And I really liked where it was going. You know, the whole seeing the sun and opening his eyes and things like that. And then, like you say, for it to just be like lol joke, like it's just a bit. Yeah. All of that just gets taken away.
Also,
and I
will say, I know that technically it wasn't part of TV canon, but I prefer the idea that the reason why he has an eye on his head is because his eyes were burnt out. And so, because now it's been retconned that he has eyes, I just start to think, well, why does he have an eye on his head? And the reason that's given in the episode is that he didn't want to open them. And I don't really believe that, to be honest.
Yeah, okay. I mean, it's a lot of effort to keep your eyes closed.
Yeah. Well, actually, the funniest thing is that the last time I watched it was with a friend who was watching it for the first time, and he came up with the most funny reason for it, and he said maybe his eyes grew back.
Oh God! I mean, this is a sci-fi show. Stranger things have happened.
But no, so. apparently, they've fixed the issue in Big Finish, like in the 8th Doctor Time War series. Apparently, they gave a reason to why his eyes come back. So I suppose continuity-wise, it now lines up. But in terms of just a pure like storytelling purpose, I feel like this idea of the Davros actually having eyes and keeping them shut because he was scared isn't as compelling to me as they were burnt out, and that's why he has one on his forehead.
Yeah, I mean, for anyone listening, if you're into it, I mean, go and check out any Big Finish story that involves Davros because nearly all of them are brilliant.
Oh yeah.
Like you just said, the 8th Doctor. It's mainly Volume 4, I think, the Time War stuff that Davros is in.
Palindrome, I think, is the one people talk about.
Yeah, and it's brilliant. It's Terry Malloy, not Julian Bleach, but he does a fantastic job. And also the audio that's just called Davros on its own. That explores this idea that, you know, because Davros is forced to work with the 6th Doctor, but he's not necessarily always being, you know, manipulative. Like, the scenes are great, but it's not always like manipulation. It shows more of a vulnerable side to Davros, which is what we start to get here. And I just wish, you know, it might not have been Moffat's intention from the start, but part of me wishes he'd been a bit braver and just sort of like seen it through to the end, I guess. Well, whether that conclusion be Davros, quote unquote, dies or he instigates something that wipes out that faction of Daleks. I just wish the trajectory we were on with it, like you're saying with those scenes, was seen through rather than it being.
Well, again, a part of it is also that story feels to me like it was inspired by the Big Finish Davros stories. But I don't think it works in the same way. And also, this is something that I do have an issue with, not necessarily with every story, but across Series 9, a lot of the stories have this obsession with subverting the plot. And I think it has mixed results, and in this case, I don't think it works.
Which bit specifically? As in Davros revealing he tricked him, or just...
Well, it's both Davros revealing he tricked him, and partially with the Davros thing, it's because he actually said at the start of the story that he was going to do it, so he already knew it was going to happen. But then also the Doctor tricking him as well, not necessarily as a twist, but more so just in terms of the fact that to me, it devalues that whole conversation that they have with each other. And I get what it's trying to go for is this idea of that conversation they had is like what these people would be like together if they were friends, but then they can't have that. And then you have the bit at the end where he saves young Davros, and I get the sort of thematic resonance it's trying to go for, but I feel like the execution undermines the meaning behind it.
It's sort of like what we've said about other points, like the Dalek casing and like the Doctor's character. It's like it seems like there's these ideas that are there and they're interesting, or that they could make for good TV, but the execution just, well, particularly in this opening two-parter, doesn't reflect it, or it's not. Do you know what I mean? It's like the thing. Oh, it's an interesting idea, but it's not. It doesn't always carry to the full extent. Although what I will say, and I still feel this now, the opener, the cold open to Magician's Apprentice, when we find out that boy is Davros, I think is brilliant.
I do love
because
that
I remember watching that on broadcast.
Jaw-dropping. It's jaw-dropping.
Yeah, and I was watching it I was at uni, and some of the mates watching were Americans. They'd never, well, I'd watched Series 8 with them, but that was all they'd seen. And it was like, because obviously I was like, oh my god, and they were like, what? But they were like really hyped about it. You know, they wanted to know what all the hype was about. And I just think even now it's because you see, and also Capaldi's brilliant because you see it in his face. He doesn't need to say anything, but you see like the mixture of horror, fear, conflict in his head. And initially, I know he goes back, but initially again when you watch for the first time, seeing him leave the TARDIS and leave that boy there is quite shocking in a good way, I feel.
Well, yeah, I mean,
because it's not what you'd expect.
Well, it's kind of mirroring the conflict from Genesis of the Daleks, except in this case, rather than it just being the first Dalek embryo, it's actually Davros as a living child, and it's kind of meant to be. It's
literally the scenario that the Fourth Doctor talked about, isn't it? And I just feel, but I feel again, I know he goes back, and that sort of, you could argue, undermines it a bit, but I feel. When he left, I was like, but I kind of get it, because we've heard in various future incarnations, not just on TV, but in Big Finish, in loads of expanded media, they refer back to Genesis. They always say, the Fifth Doctor in Resurrection, for example. He says, once I had an opportunity to destroy the Daleks, and it's not a mistake I wish to repeat. And I know he, ultimately, yes, he doesn't kill Davros. But what I mean is, after the Fourth Doctor, loads of incarnations reference this point in time, that they had the opportunity, and they didn't do it. And they always sound a bit spiteful or regretful about it, even though the Fourth Doctor ultimately didn't do it. So when Capaldi leaves in the TARDIS initially, I sort of understood it, if that makes sense. Because I was like, it's sort of a culmination of what all these Doctors have had built up from that one decision they didn't take. Well, yeah,
especially because when you think about the Time War, the Doctor basically does what he decided not to do in Genesis, is commit genocide. Because the threat was much more direct and personal, because it was obviously not only his own planet and his people, but also like people elsewhere as well. Like, it was the idea that, like, well, if the Daleks win, then everyone else could die, and so the stakes were much higher. And so now we're at the point where he's been through all of that and the Time War, and he's faced with it again. So yeah, I agree with
you.
I know the cold open is excellent. But yeah,
as I said, I know him going back ultimately obviously does remove some of that out of it, and obviously on rewatches as well. And I know, I understand why it was done that way, because ultimately the Doctor's the hero, and if he had just left and Davros had died there, that would have seemed very extremely cold, I guess, too cold for this character. So I did think, even at the time, I thought, oh, well, he's going to go back. He's going to do something to ensure that he lives or whatever. But yeah, no, I just think at the time I thought it was brilliant.
Yeah.
I thought it was a great culmination.
Yeah. But yeah, I'm not a fan of that story personally. I think when I first saw it, I was quite hyped for it. So it was quite exciting to watch, but on rewatch with the hype removed and just looking at it in its pure context, I don't think it works.
Yeah, I think I agree with you on terms of, like, I think it is for the most part like a hype story, to kick off the new season. The moments I do like that I've mentioned, I really like, and I love rewatching it for that. But it's not one I'd like rewatch constantly for all of the content in it. Like you said, if I was going to rewatch it, I'd probably just watch specific scenes on YouTube. Like the Dr. Davros scene, the cold open. Clara and Missy in the square. Do you know what I mean? Just specific scenes rather than necessarily watch the full thing.
Now, in terms of the Sonic Shades,
yeah.
In regards to Series 9, not a fan. However, when we get to Series 10, I will actually have something positive to say about it, because it did come in really... They actually utilized the Sonic Shades really well in Series 10, I think. So we'll get to it when we get to that. But at first, I was not happy.
Yeah, I mean, like, I remember when he first whipped them out, like the whole "I don't have a screwdriver anymore," and
wearable technology.
Wearable technology. Like, again, as a concept, I was like, it's fine. Like, I'm not against him using something different from a screwdriver. But I just think it's that case of they just got way too overused in Series 9. Like sort of like how. not. Some people argue in the RTD era, don't they, that the 9th and 10th Doctors use the sonic screwdriver for pretty much anything and everything.
I think
And,
it's.
I'm not saying they always.
I think it's in the second. It's mainly in the second half. Like Runaway Bride onwards is when he uses it a lot more.
Yeah. And obviously, like, the sonic screwdriver always throughout its history has had that thing of, it's the magic wand that gets the Doctor out of trouble.
Yeah.
And
although I saw a compilation the other day that was every Sonic use in the whole show, and the entire of Classic Who only like equated to like 2.5 minutes.
Yeah, because they don't use it that often in Classic Who when you think about it.
Yeah.
Like it's not the be all and end all. Whereas, like, I know, it is cool to see it, but I just think the Sonic Shades in Series 9, they just went overkill, like needlessly overkill. Yeah. I think they forget that.
Before I forget, I was just gonna say, I think Matt Smith I saw has 33% of all Sonic use in the whole show.
Well, that doesn't surprise me because he whips that bad boy out all the time.
Yeah.
But I just think they forget that the Doctor can solve things or do things without a sonic device, because I mean that was pretty much all of 80s Who for the most part. They went sonicless, and in some cases it actually makes things more interesting. So I just feel, I don't want to say laziness, because Moffat for the most part is not a lazy writer, but the amount it gets used in Series 9 just makes it feel like they either didn't want to think of anything else, or it was like an easy fix. That's how it comes across to me in Series 9, the Sonic Shades. An easy fix. Yeah,
and also I think this is also something I think probably Peter Capaldi himself had a say in, because I would imagine that he would be like, well, I want something that, people can go out and buy that isn't too expensive, and those like sunglasses that he's wearing is probably something that isn't too expensive. You can just get from a shop. Which I can understand. I also know that Peter Capaldi had a big input into a lot of things in Series 9. Like the scene where Missy pops out of the screen apparently was his idea.
Oh, really?
Yeah. And then obviously...
Well, that's just a weird moment that never happens again.
Yeah, and then obviously like a lot of the things like the guitar stuff and, the Rocker Doctor thing was his idea that he had, and Moffat decided to use it. So it's not just a Stephen Moffat thing. It is part of Peter Capaldi as an actor as well, contributing to the show.
Yeah, and that's fair enough. I totally understand that thing of making it more accessible to people. And I say the concept of sonic sunglasses is like, I'm fine with it. It's cool, but I just think the way they were used in Series 9 was just, again, that thing of like overkill. Whereas, like, say when we get to Series 10, it actually has a more useful use, if you like. So absolutely. And also, like, I kind of get he wants something different, because for obviously all of Series 8 he's using what is essentially Matt Smith's sonic screwdriver. So I get the want for something different, because I know he didn't get it in the end, not really, but he sort of said the same about the TARDIS, didn't he? Even though it got changed up a little bit, he was essentially using Matt Smith's second TARDIS.
Yeah.
So
and
I get that.
And Matt Smith's second companion as well.
Yeah, but to much better degree, arguably.
Yeah. I mean, we talked a lot about in Series 8 about that. So the Under the Lake two-parter, I actually really like. I think we probably agree mostly on that. There's only a couple of things I have to say. The first thing is that it's quite weird how he suddenly goes back to his Series 8 persona. Not that I don't like that. I really like his Series 8 persona. But I do think it's a bit of a jarring thing, the fact that we've just had him established as a different, like, quite a different tone of his character, and then suddenly he reverts back to what he was. It's almost like the Under the Lake two-parter maybe was written before, and they didn't. I was about
to say, do you think it could have been like a communication thing?
Possibly,
because I'd argue as Moffat, I don't want to seem like I'm just bashing Moffat all the time, but like if Moffat's head writer, and he's showrunner, I would argue if he's going to be the one who instigates this massive shift in the lead character, which he does, because he wrote the opening two-parter, then I would argue he needs to then communicate that to the writers coming in, writing other episodes, so it feels more in line.
This is something that has happened before and after, is that you'll get these guest writer episodes where the character feels like how they were in the previous year. if you look at like Rise of the Cybermen and Age of Steel, it's basically David Tennant playing the Ninth Doctor. And then you look at something like the God Complex, it feels like Series 5. And that's partially because it was actually written for Series 5. And then like the Hungry Earth and Cold Blood is like Matt Smith is playing the 10th Doctor. Like it does happen.
Yeah, no, and it like sometimes it's less jarring than others, but I think like we said, because the shift is so vast this time around, makes it more stand out. And I think though I know what you mean, like he's very Series 8 in this story, but I feel it's the right level of Series 8 that I would have wanted in Series 9 as a whole, if that makes sense. It's like it's not as spiky as he is in, say, Into the Dalek or Robot of Sherwood, like those early Series 8 episodes, but it's there enough that it feels like it's the same character, but you can tell he's starting to mellow out a bit.
Yeah, I think.
Whereas
I think maybe if they had a transition that felt like this was the natural step after the opener, then that would have worked better. Because I really like him in Under the Lake. I think he's great.
Yeah, no, he's fun. Like the whole, and some of the jokes are really funny. Like the whole, the cue cards thing. Yeah, like that's funny. That's great. Yeah. Like that's, and it works for that Doctor, that Series 8 vibe.
And actually, this is quite unlike me. I actually really like Clara in that two-parter too. I think she's fantastic in Under the Lake.
She's great. It's one of her. I'd argue it's one of her best episodes. To be honest.
She's obviously she has her own like personal traits that are hers, but I would say that she is written almost a bit like a Classic Who companion, but with a bit more like agency.
Yeah, I mean, if the whole story in a way feels like a very classic story, that that base under siege.
Part one is
part one.
Part one is very Classic Who. I think part two gets more like new series. It's more about like. It's obviously got to do with paradoxes, and not to say that Classic Who didn't do that, because it did, but the style it goes for, and especially the subversion that it goes for, is very New Who and very Moffat era. However, in this instance, I actually really like it. I think the subversion that Before the Flood goes for really works. Yeah,
and I like the cliffhanger as well.
I love the cliffhanger. I love that.
The ghostly Doctor, because that's sort of cliffhanger where you're like, it surprises you and you definitely want to find out what happens next. Like, I remember when that went out, I was like, next week needs to happen now. Do you know what I mean? It was one of them, and I love cliffhangers like that. That's the best kind of Who cliffhanger, the ones that instantly make you want to go, I need to see. Because, you have some cliffhangers where you go, oh yeah, that's neat, but you're not dying to watch the next one straight away. That one was like, whoa, I need to... What happens next, and it works great, and the side characters are great.
Oh yeah,
like that whole side cast, and I loved seeing as well. I can't remember her name, which is really bad off the top of my head, but the deaf actor. I just think, and it was again, it wasn't just. I felt it wasn't just we've included a deaf actor for the
of course.
As some people love to say,
interesting way.
It wasn't just, as some people like to say, a diversity hire. Like they actually used it to in the story, and
it was very distinct. It was something that we'd never seen before, and it was really interesting. And then also the fact that this deaf character was directly tied that into how the monsters worked as well was really cool.
Yeah. I'm so glad because was it Toby Whithouse who wrote this?
Toby Whithouse. Yeah.
I love how she wasn't just a deaf character for the sake of it, and it had no further implications than that. It actually had, like, as you say, this deeper connection to the story, to the monster. It's great, and it didn't feel forced. Like, it didn't feel like we've just shoehorned this disabled actor in there. And as an actor myself, who I'm visually impaired to a degree, so as a actor with a disability, it was refreshing to see, because there's nothing worse. Like, if it's a story about disability, that's different. But there's nothing worse, I think, than seeing a story where that's not the focus, and you've included someone with a disability, and you can tell it's shoehorned in.
Yeah,
like that is. I'd argue that's more insulting.
You might as well, but that wasn't the case here. You might as well not even have them in it if that's the case.
Quite, yeah. But this one was completely different. I think it was fantastic, and it was great to see. And it's just like yourself, I don't have much more to say apart from it's just fun. It's just great.
It's a really good story.
Great two-parter.
There's only one other thing that I wasn't that hot on. This is the episode where because obviously it was in Which Is Familiar where they first bring up the hybrid, but it's Under the Lake is the first unless I'm mistaken, I believe it's the first time they bring up the Doctor's duty of care to Clara. And
yeah,
I think there's like a scene. There's a scene where they run into the TARDIS like halfway through the episode, and then it's back to normal after.
I think it's the first time the Doctor mentions the duty of care. I noticed though when I rewatched recently Kill the Moon, from Series 8, that Clara is the first, uses the phrase in reference to Courtney, and I kind of feel it's a nice sort of tie back in that the Doctor's heard that and is now incorporating that phrase to Clara, because obviously we'll get to it later, but he uses that same phrase in Hellbent as well. So yeah, I just thought it was a nice little, intentional or not, it was a nice little, that phrase, it was a nice incorporation. But yes, it was the first time I think the Doctor said it to Clara in Under the Lake.
Yeah, I'll be looking out for it when I rewatch that story eventually, but I remember it feeling a bit shoehorned at the time. Like, when it happens in the story, I was just like, whoa, that came out of nowhere. But I suppose that does happen. That does happen sometimes.
Yeah, it does. I would need to rewatch it. I know the scene. I know the exact scene you're talking about. But I can't remember if I think it felt shoehorned. I'd probably have to rewatch it again to see if it felt a bit out of place. But
we'll get onto that stuff when it becomes relevant, I suppose.
When we get there, yeah.
The girl who died and the woman who lived. I suppose this will open up the can of worms about Ashilda. Because this is when she becomes part of the series. So Ashilda is, like the series as a whole, is quite a controversial character, quite divisive.
I've seen it. It's almost like people love her in certain episodes and then hate her in other ones.
Yeah, and it's never the same ones.
No.
So, actually, funny you say that, because I quite like her in Face the Raven.
I agree, yeah.
But the rest of them, I don't. I suppose I should get into... I suppose I should get into why, if you're interested.
No, go for it. No, go for it.
So, oh, God. Okay, so, obviously, the first...
This is good.
The first thing to obviously go to tackle is the fact that it was Maisie Williams, and the marketing hyped it up, because obviously, at the time, Game of Thrones was, like, in its peak of hype and popularity. And, obviously, she was a very popular part of that show. And so... they hyped her character up because obviously she was cast in it. It was kind of stunt casting. And a lot of people were disappointed because of how it turned out and because she was cast in it and whatnot. But, like, removing all that, because when I'm rewatching the show, I don't really think about the marketing. I'm just more interested in thinking about the story and, like, in-universe. But even then, I don't think that Maisie Williams' performance was as strong as she is in some other things. I think it really depends on... I think she's an actress where... And obviously a lot of this will have to do with the fact that she's young. She's about my age, actually. And she's quite inexperienced. But I think she certainly has screen presence and some charisma. But I feel like her actual performances are quite often determined by the way she's written into stories, because I've seen her in things where she's really, really, really good. Like, her acting can be really strong in certain situations. But the problem I have is that what happened is Moffat gave her a very similar personality to a lot of other female characters in his era, where it's this really sort of confident, cocky, smart, almost sexualized female. And they all share a lot of traits. Like, obviously, they're not all the same, but you look at characters like River Song and like Missy and like Series 7 Clara especially, and there's a few others like Tasha Lem and all that. I just found that she had a lot of those traits, which was, at that point, it's Series 9, I just got so tired of seeing these characters over and over again. And then on top of that, you've got the whole thing of her becoming immortal, which again isn't something that's inherently always going to be bad, because I'm a big fan of Captain Jack Harkness. However, for me, there's a big difference between how each respective character's immortality is executed. In one case with Jack, you've got this almost an uncertainty to what actually happened to him and is an interpretation of where he's going. And so it's almost suggested like he doesn't even know if he's immortal or not. He just doesn't know when he's going to die. And obviously one of the theories is that he's the face of Bo, and then people have other theories too. But it's not really true immortality. It's more just a delayed death. Whereas with Ashilda, I feel like this is more like true immortality, where she actually can never ever die. And that to me doesn't resonate as well. Also on top of the fact of like the manner in which they had her resurrected was very out of nowhere, and I don't really believe it. Like that there's this just random little square that he could just pop into her head. It was very slapdash. And
it also feels like when the Doctor does it, like he's so resolute about doing it, and then almost instantly after he does it, he regrets it.
Yeah. And it all stemmed from, it obviously harkens back to that scene in Deep Breath where he looks in the mirror and says, who frowned me this face? And I remember at the time, when I watched it when it first broadcast, I was like really buzzing because it flashed back to Fires of Pompeii. And I was like, oh, look.
Which was pretty cool, to be fair.
And I was like, oh my god, it's Fires of Pompeii. This is so cool. But then thinking about it now, I'm a bit like, was this really like the best way to explain this? And was this like the best time? I'm not sure.
I mean, there was always rumblings, wasn't there, at the time about, are they going to reference Fires of Pompeii? Because, I think everyone watching knows, but obviously Capaldi was in it as a different character, as Caecilius.
Yeah.
There was, even the moment he was cast, there was always rumors, there was always rumblings, like, are they gonna reference it? Are they gonna do it? And like, I think the reference is fine, but my issue is, in regards to Ashilda, is it's that compunction that Clara reminds him of that inspires him to make her immortal, but that is not what happens in Fires of Pompeii. Fires of Pompeii, Donna is asking him to save someone, which he does. He saves the family, but he doesn't make them immortal. He avoids them from that catastrophe. And I agree with you in that maybe, like, it is cool to reference Fires of Pompeii and that notion of saving people, but considering this character in question in Ashilda is at that point dead, it's like, it's almost like he forgot the wider ramifications of making her immortal. This question of immortality has been raised in Doctor Who so many times. The one that springs to mind, the Five Doctors with the whole Rassilon thing, the key to immortality. What's the phrase? But what's the phrase in the Five Doctors? Like, to he who loses shall win, and to he who wins shall lose. That thing of you win immortality, but that's ultimately the greatest loss, because immortality is it's lonely, it's isolating.
And you think about like the way the Doctor treats Jack once he's become, somewhat immortal.
Yeah, he's hesitant about it. Like he's wary of it. When we see him in series 3, he's almost like he's happy to see him, but when he learns that, he's not happy about the fact he's immortal.
From the moment that Jack becomes immortal, he stops wanting to travel with him in the TARDIS.
Yeah, exactly. Almost like he's afraid of what that means or what that could do. And I must say, I really like Ashilda. I know we said Face the Raven, but I think I like her most in some, not all the way through, but in some moments in The Woman Who Lived. Particularly the moments where she's, it's those scenes with the Doctor where she's explaining the life she's lived so far and what she's been through. The one that always sticks out to me is when she talks about the plague about her children dying. Like babies dying. Yeah. And again, like I can't remember the exact phrasing, but I remember thinking, like, for Doctor Who, like this is quite mature. Like this is this is being addressed in quite a very stark, bleak way. I mean, that's what the Black Plague was, of course, but do you know what I mean? And I must admit, that performance Maisie Williams gives there, I think, is probably my favourite of the series in that scene, because you can get the sort of sadness, but also the bitterness that she feels that the Doctor has made her immortal. I think it's just it's her standout scene for me as a character, Ashilda. That scene in The Woman Who Lived, when he's going through her records and she's just sort of saying, "Well, you made, this is you. You made me like this."
The Woman Who Lived is an odd episode. It's
that's one word for it. Yes,
like it's because it's on one hand it is meant to be the Doctor meeting Ashilda again in the future, And like with a lot of Moffats, I mean, technically it's written by Catherine Tregenna, but it is very Moffat-y in the sense of like, he likes to play with what happens when lots of time passes for one person, but not for the other. He does this all the time with all of his characters. I mean, the Weeping Angels is probably the biggest example of it and the most famous. But by doing that, it shows what happened to Ashilda after the girl who died and into the woman who lived, and we learn about what happened in between that time. And all the consequences of it. But then on the other hand, it also has this really like flimsy plot as well. And it's so weird.
And the whole, what's his name? Leono, the lion thing?
Yeah.
And all that. Like, it's just, I feel the woman who lived, you didn't need the monster. You didn't even need the whole Sam Swift thing. I think you could have just had it about Ashilda.
You honestly could have made it like the setting is a pure historical and it's a character drama about someone from another story.
Yeah.
You could have done something like that.
I just think, like, I just wish all of the focus had been on Ashilda as, like, that payoff. Like, basically, that scene I mentioned about where she's telling the doctor what's happened to her, like, give me an episode about that, you know. Let's really understand the ramifications of the doctor making her immortal.
Yeah, and
because you see a little bit of it in that scene.
And I also
and I'm like,
think,
yes, this, you know.
I also think the way the doctor's characterized in that story would have been much more effective to me anyway, if it had been more like how he was characterized in Under the Lake and parts of Series 8. Obviously, he needs to have a bit more compassion, which is naturally going to happen with his character arc. But what I mean is that by having him be a bit more serious, I think I could take the drama more seriously with Ashilda as well. Whereas what we get is there's a lot of like that midlife crisis comedy in that story as well, and I just think that distracts from what you could actually be doing with that time.
Yeah, it's completely the wrong place for it, arguably.
Yeah.
Like, completely the wrong place. And, like, I just think, again, like, the making someone immortal, I think we've established already in this universe that it's not a small thing, you know, it's massive, it's a big thing. And I feel aside from that, those little moments, like that scene in particular and, like, odd lines here and there, it's not given the weight that it deserves, like, the event of her being immortal, which, like, as you say, the distractions with the comedy, with the whole lion creature, with Sam Swift, like, you don't need it. Like, I'd rather just have an episode about, even, honestly, and I know this sounds big, but even if the whole episode was just the Doctor being with Ashilda and obviously not, well, do you know what I mean? If it was an episode of just them talking about it, like, discussing about it, that would have been a lot more interesting. Like, because
I think maybe
you know,
it's possible that this may be another case of BBC interference, saying that you can't have a Doctor Who episode without like a monster in a sci-fi show. You know, it's possible that
which has been mentioned before, hasn't it? Like people saying, "Oh well, we had to have the monster."
And it's just like how
like
in
that.
For example, like in Rosie, you've got Krasko and Demons of the Punjab, you've got the Thigerians, and they don't really add anything to the plot that you couldn't already be doing.
Yeah,
if you know what I mean.
Yeah. And if that was the case, I wish they'd just sort of buck that trend for the sake of, like, you know, for the sake of good storytelling.
Honestly, pure historicals, like, I think can be brilliant, and I feel like there is this weird stigma around them that they're not very good. When I personally think that that some of those pure historicals they have in the William Hartnell era are actually brilliant stories, and it just needs you just need to. Because I think also part of the problem is a lot of them are missing, and also a lot of them are written in the 60s with a very old tone. I just think you need to recontextualize it for an audience that would enjoy it at this generation, and I think people would open their eyes on pure historicals more.
Yeah, especially since historical dramas are, like, big, you know, like, whether they're, you know, that people, there is an interest there, so I don't know why it's still sort of shunned away from, but I mean, I don't like we can talk more about Ashilda as we go, but like in terms of those two episodes, woman who died and the girl who died and the woman who lived, like I don't have much more to say aside from I'm fine with the making Ashilda immortal, but the instant payoff in that next episode, there's not enough of it, you know.
Yeah, I personally have more problems with the first episode because I just can't comprehend that plot. It's just so weird. What
with the Maya and the Odin thing?
Yeah, and then there's the eels, and then there's like the baby that's so insightful, and it's just, and then you've got like the thing drinking testosterone, and it's just so weird.
Yeah, that's just. I mean, when you put it like that, yeah, there's just more.
It's also quite disappointing because Jamie Mathieson wrote two of my favorite Series 8 episodes. And then him and Moffat go ahead and write The Girl Who Died, which is just this weird tonal mess that I can't quite. It's just so like. It's not. I don't think The Girl Who Died and Women Who Lived are like maybe as terrible as some people say they are, but they're just so off-putting because I can't wrap my head around exactly what they are. If you know what I mean.
No, that's true. That's true. And I mean, the whole finale, like the whole framing them like they're scared, the Benny Hill theme thing, like it's a bit, it's very odd. It's very bizarre.
Yeah.
And like, just the thing with Ashilda in that one though, I don't mind her in The Girl Who Died because obviously this is pre-immortal stage, and she's just another. Yeah. She's another girl in the town, and I don't mind it. And actually, although I know what you're saying about the whole cocky, confident stuff that Moffat likes to do. But in The Woman Who Lived, I kind of like how her character's changed from The Girl Who Died, rather than just being exactly the same.
Yeah, of course.
But I get what you mean on the whole.
Yeah. Although I don't like how there's that weird bit in The Girl Who Died where she's obviously a stranger, and then the doctor sees her and like recognizes her, but there's not really any reason for why he recognizes her. It's kind of weird. It's almost like it's meant to be like foreshadowing that she's going to be something special, but he doesn't know it yet. But I don't know, it was just it didn't really make sense to me.
I think so far it's like a lot of things in Series 9, isn't it, where the ideas are there, and then somewhere along the way, whether it's communication or BBC or whatever, it just didn't quite
there's
didn't
also
quite get there.
I will say, I think it's at the end of Women Who Live when like Clara comes back onto the TARDIS. He looks at that like photo of like, I think it may be Coal Hill Skull, and Ashilda's just there, and I don't know why, but it just makes me laugh. It's just something so funny about that photo.
I think it's the way it's framed, because isn't she like half in like the doorway or something, just like smiling, and it's just like
she's like smiling at the camera, and it's like
it's just a little bit. If it was a more candid photo, like if it was like her walking in the background, not looking at the camera, rather than her staring directly at the camera like half in a door or whatever it is. Yeah, no, I get that.
Yeah, I suppose we should move on to the Zygon two-parter then.
Yes.
Okay.
The Zygon two-parter.
This is a tricky one. As Matt Smith said in Amy's Choice, the Zygon two-parter. This is one that I've flipped on. I think when I first watched it, I really liked it, and part of that, again, like with other stories in this series, a lot of it was hype around like the Zygons, and how it was like it was a sequel to Day of the Doctor, so it was like a nice like tie-in to that story. And I'm gonna go through my positives first. So
go for it.
I love Jenna Coleman's performance as Bonnie. I think it's one of her best in the show. I think she makes a really convincing villain, which does kind of confirm some things to me about her, and why she may get on my wick quite a lot as Clara, because she's actually really, really good on the bad side. But I really do like her performance as Bonnie. And then I also like the scenes with Davros and the Witch's Familiar. When you take the war speech as its own thing, and put it as like a highlight, on the surface it looks amazing. Like it seems like this amazing Doctor speech. It ties into the Time War, it ties into his part of the Zygons and the Silurians and the humans and UNIT and everything, and the Brigadier, and you've got like the performance from Capaldi is phenomenal, and like I said, it as this individual scene, it's great. But like the scene with Davros in The Witch's Familiar, I don't feel like it works as a whole in terms of the story. Firstly, because I don't buy that this is a solution that not only the Zygons but also Kate would believably do in terms of solving the conflict. And on top of that, I also think that it's a bit undermined because of what happens after, because it's revealed that their memories have been wiped, and he had been trying to convince them for quite a while. So it's almost like the speech wasn't even off the cuff the first time he said it. It was almost like he had to like keep on convincing them. And I don't know, for some reason that just dampens that whole scene. And
yeah, I mean that speech. Obviously, we all love that speech, and it's great and stuff. And Capaldi's the right person to do it. In retrospect, though, I almost feel like that speech could have also worked really well in the Day of the Doctor itself. Say if maybe, I don't know who would have done it. That's the thing. I think it might work well in that episode, but I can't see it done by any other Doctor than Capaldi.
Yeah, of course.
I think he had the right amount of gravitas and weight to do it.
Maybe John Hurt?
I thought that, but John Hurt's also like still in the midst of the war himself. But it might have been a nice.
Would have been out of character.
Yeah, a little bit, but I couldn't see Matt Smith or David Tennant doing it to the same effect. But I don't know, the speech itself, like just take it as text. I think somewhere in Day of the Doctor it could have worked. But
like the thing is it's odd because I do think that speech is something that the Doctor at that time would do. Like it's in character for him to be saying those things, but I just don't buy that it would be a possible or well, not necessarily possible, but like I don't buy that people would necessarily 100% agree with them and do that, because of when I think about the repercussions of letting the guard down, it doesn't, to me, it doesn't symbolize the actual realism behind the conflict that's at hand. It feels more like an idealistic solution to this war. It doesn't seem like something that would actually happen, and I feel like that's when people contextualize that speech as this is how you solve wars. I feel like that's oversimplifying what actually is happening. So on that front, I don't like it, but on the other hand, I do also think that the Doctor doing that speech seems like it would absolutely happen. But I just think that if I was writing the story, what I would have is I would have him deliver that speech and then have his heart broken by having the humans and the Zygons not take his word for it, because that's how I feel it would actually pan out. Yeah,
it's most likely right. I mean in terms of that story though, like how in the first part it sets up that for the most part the Zygons have been living fairly peacefully, or some of them have amongst the humans.
Yeah.
I kind of like that angle. It reminded me of what they did with the Ice Warriors in the Curse of Peladon. How they weren't just instantly framed as the villains. I like it when Doctor Who monsters have more than just being the threat, that they're actually these intelligent species who are capable of, I guess, what we consider to be good. So I did like the fact that it wasn't all Zygons who were like rebelling against the humans. It was only like a faction of them or whatever. And like the whole archetype with Bonnie, like her whole way of thinking, I thought was great, and how the Doctor challenged that. So I guess what I'm saying is I like the way the Zygons were handled in this story. I don't know about you, but I don't know. I just like the way they were presented and how it was all articulated.
I think I like the ideas. I don't like the execution.
Oh, that's a theme that's coming up, isn't it?
I know. It's something that it's a thing with Moffat.
Well, yeah. Well, no, I'm not denying you there. Yeah, that's true.
That's kind of how I feel. But I think there's some really neat ideas in the story, but I don't think it comes together well. I also like some of the really heavy-handed ISIS stuff was kind of a bit like, I don't know, a bit on the nose.
Yeah, I think I felt that more so at the time, because obviously ISIS is still very much a real threat in today's world. I'm not saying it isn't, but I feel at that time in 2015 it was like sort of at a peak, both in what was going on and also like the news coverage as well.
Yeah,
so I think it felt more jarring then.
I also think because Peter Harness did kill the Boon, he already had like a target on his back in terms of how he handles political themes. And so when he goes and does a story like this, it only just like makes it worse for like people that don't like how he handles it. And it just it's sticky. And I think there's a reason why Pyramid at the End of the World is very toned down on that front.
Yeah, do you think that was his conscious effort to tone it down, or do you think that was
I don't know. I don't know, but I know that I've heard an interview with Peter Harness about Kill the Moon, and also I know that when you look at the credits, like Moffat was a co-writer on his series 9 and 10 stories, so I get the funny feeling that when he was brought back, he asked Moffat to help him with his scripts because of the backlash that came with Kill the Moon. I would imagine that might be something that happened, but
Possibly.
Yeah.
Yeah.
There's also other things in that story, like
okay.
there's a funny thing, again, like talking about how I flipped on the story. When I first watched it, I loved the scene where the soldiers saw their family members. But then on my most recent viewing, I don't even know why my mind's changed on it, but for some reason now I don't actually find that believable at all. That the soldiers would fall for it. And it's very odd. It's kind of odd to me how like my mind has changed so much about that story. I don't know. I suppose you have to be in the right frame of mind to watch it, but it's just the thing with I find this a lot with unit stories in the Moffat era is that because the era is quite larger than life and it's quite beyond reality. When they go back to do a story that's very much in the tone of reality, it's a weird clash. And I don't really click with when Stephen Moffat introduces these really almost supernatural ideas into these stories because they don't feel right.
No, I mean, I'd argue it's one of my I don't want to like not favorite, but it's one of my more like preferred unit stories of the New Who era, and I don't know why. I just think it's every time I watch it, I have a lot of fun with it. You know, as we said, there are bits and pieces, but I just think it's a very good, for what it is, it's a very good 2-part adventure that asks a lot of questions. It gets you thinking, has a lot of memorable moments. I think all of the cast in that episode are on top form, personally. Yeah, I just think it's a good sequel to The Day of the Doctor, and it's also a good sort of pseudo sequel to Terror of the Zygons, which of course was like, you know, their only classic Who appearance. Yeah, I've just always liked it. Really, I've not really thought I found anything wrong with. Like, I get what you're saying about the reality thing, you know, and it all clashing. And I must admit, I've never really seen it that way before, and it'll give me something to think about when I rewatch it again. But yeah, I've never sort of had like a problem with this one, really. I just always really enjoyed it for what it is.
And obviously we already covered like the comedy stuff, like with like the Dr. Disco and the browser history, and you know, he's definitely channeling midlife crisis Doctor in this story. Like there's the bit where he's walking on the plane and he does the, you know, the pose and everything.
I think my favorite line is when they arrive in London and he just goes, "London, what a dump." I don't know why. Sorry, any Londoners, but I mean, he's kind of right. So,
okay. There was also one other bit that I specifically remember was during the same scene as the speech, but he's talking about Clara's influence on him. I'm not sure how I feel about that moment. I can't say I like it. I definitely don't feel good about it. In terms of just whether or not it's actually earned in the story, I'm not sure. But there was something about that moment that really rubbed me the wrong way. I could be wrong if there's like justification for it, but it just felt forced. It felt like the Doctor was giving Clara praise for reasons that I can't really understand.
Yeah, especially when I guess you think back to Series 8 in Flatline, you know, that whole thing at the end of saying you were a good doctor, good, or like good, well, you know the bit I mean, where he's like, goodness had nothing to do with it.
Yeah, you're a great doctor, but goodness had nothing to do with it, yeah.
It almost seems like, because that always to me sort of stood out as like a thing of him sort of pseudo saying, I don't want you to be like me.
Yeah.
Whereas in Series 9, it's almost, in that, as you say, in that moment, it's kind of like a weird semi-reversal of that.
Well,
maybe
in Series 9, he's very much, there's a lot of moments where he praises Clara quite a lot, but the part where it's a disconnect is I can't really figure out why, if that makes sense. Like if there was a, because there are other scenes in the show where the Doctor will praise companions where I will think, oh yes, I understand why he's saying that. There's a scene I really like in the Satan Pit when he's facing the devil and he's talking about how he feels about Rose. And when he's saying things like why he believes in her and all that, I think about scenes that they've had before that story. Like I think about the Series 1 finale. I think about, you know, all of the things that they've been together. And when he's speaking the dialogue, I can point to moments that have led to this moment, to where he kind of, I can understand why he's saying what he does, and therefore, because I can believe it, I can get invested in the character drama. Whereas with something like this scene in the Zygon version, and it does happen with with other parts of Series 9 as well, but this is one that I can actually remember. I just can't really find... I can't think of why he's saying these things. And so there's a disconnect for me.
Could it be possibly, and this might be accused of being headcanon because it isn't explicitly stated, but we're talking about this whole thing of like the Doctor's going through his midlife crisis and how in Series 8 he's very much avoiding like connections in general. He does state he doesn't want Clara to be like him, but he's also avoiding that sort of, deeper connection. Whereas is it maybe this midlife crisis mode that he's sort of just lost sight of that and he's maybe?
Not sure.
Yeah. Again, that's more of like a headcanon-y thing. It's not explicitly stated in the story,
yeah.
but...
Well, I mean, it's established, certainly, in this series that they're very close. Like, you think about, especially in like stuff like The Girl Who Died and The Woman Who Lived, the way that they're acting around each other is very tender. And you have like the bit where they're dancing, and they have the bit at the end of Woman Who Lived when she hugs him, and it's very much in contrast to what Series 8 was. They're very close now, and I get that. But where I don't quite understand it is when he's saying things like the thing that happened to you, I let Clara Oswald get inside my head, trust me, she doesn't leave. And I can't quite figure out exactly what he means by that. Because of that, it comes across quite forced to me. That makes sense.
Yeah.
But anyway, there is an episode before Face the Raven. And that is Sleep No More.
Yeah.
So I don't think we have too much to say here because it's not really an episode that heavily affects the overall series. It's more just a one-off.
Yeah, and it's really the only... I know some people class it, others as one-offs, but it's really the only true standalone of the season, I'd argue.
Well, yeah, obviously because the finale has 3 standalone episodes that are all linked together, whereas this is the only, like, truly, it's the only one that doesn't actually link at all to Series 9, apart from the fact that the Doctor and Clara are in it. I used to think the same with Blink. I used to think that was the only one in Series 3 that doesn't tie it all together. But then I had a conversation with someone and I realized that the Weeping Angels inadvertently tie into the whole idea of religion in that series. So Blink actually does tie into Series 3. And when I realized that, I was like, oh my god. Oh my god.
Yeah, I mean, Sleep No More, like, it's ambitious because, of course, it was this whole thing of it was all shot in the style of found footage, which, is arguably a trope these days that is a bit done to death. But for Doctor Who, like, fair play, it had a go. The story itself is fine. I don't know, it was just sort of... I remember this at the time. Like, Sleep No More, I think, is the one episode of Series 9 that I could happily skip on a rewatch.
Mm-hmm. It's a very skippable episode. So... Yeah, the funny thing is, the way I described Sleep No More, I mean, obviously when we did part 1, I called it nauseating, which I'll get to. I always like to say it's kind of like a loading screen. It just feels like... It's like when you ever have that thing when, like, I remember I had this as a kid, it's like, I rent out a game from the store and I play it to death, like, on the night that I got it. And then it gets to, like, the middle of the night and I'm too tired to play. But I just sit there looking at the loading screen for like an hour.
Yeah.
And that's kind of what Sleep No More is to me. It's just it's kind of a Doctor Who loading screen, and it's very strange.
Yeah, and it's just, again, like, I know we've said it a lot, but it's very much, there's concepts, but they're not. Yeah. And I do wonder if the found footage style hindered that somewhat. Like, was out of all the New Who stories, was this the one that needed to be shot in a found footage style, so to speak?
Well, I personally think the execution in terms of the direction is absolutely appalling for a lot of it. That's why I call it nauseating, because it's so disorientating to see characters look at me in the eye and also have the camera be found footage and shaking around, that it makes me feel sick watching it, and it's almost hard to watch sometimes.
And I think it doesn't help in this one because it's not just one camera. Like, you're shifting between, isn't it? Like, there's like some like security footage, which is technically like found footage. But whereas I think found footage in any genre, not just things like horror, but I think found footage works best. Like, yes, it is a bit nauseating in general because the camera's always shaking, but I feel it works best when it is just one camera the whole way through, rather than shifting to different cameras. Which I know, obviously that's very technically demanding. because then you're essentially shooting nearly everything in one shot, pretty much. But yeah, I just think, like, if you're going to do it for Doctor Who, this wasn't the episode to do it. I don't know which one I would pick, like, out of what we've got, because possibly Oxygen from Series 10. Maybe that could have worked as a found footage thing. But I just think, they gave it a go, but maybe found footage isn't best suited to Doctor Who.
I suppose Love and Monsters has a bit of found footage in it.
Yeah,
I suppose so. Like with the webcam stuff, but most of it isn't.
Yeah, maybe Doctor Who just isn't the right kind of thing for found footage. I don't know.
But yeah, this episode commits more sins for me than just that, because the concept is based around like sleep dust in your eyes, and it's also suggested that this sleep dust produces like cameras that you can see, and I don't think that makes any sense.
Yeah. And do you think it goes beyond like pulp sci-fi stuff as well?
Yeah, it's I don't know what Mark Gatiss was thinking, to be honest. And then also,
well, he wanted a sequel, didn't he?
Yeah,
he was like, let's write Sleep No More too.
No. And then there's the fact that it wastes Reece Shearsmith, which was,
absolutely.
I mean, Doctor Who has a history of wasting celebrities, but like this is one of the biggest examples of it. Like Reece Shearsmith is like one of the funniest British comedy actors I've seen, and he gets absolutely nothing to do in this story. And then you've got the fact that like the story just ends because like the climax of the story, and obviously this has happened in other stories as well, but it's done in a different way. But what happens is that the sleep dust takes over the ship, and then the Doctor and Clara escape in the TARDIS, and that's it. That's all that happens.
Yeah, I was gonna say the ending is very it's anticlimactic to say the least. But then, because isn't the whole thing they were going for? It's like the final message from Reece Shearsmith is like he's saying, "Oh, but could this happen to you?" Because obviously he's like disintegrating. Yeah. But it's like, "Oh, could this happen to you?" Or is that like, I don't know. It almost feels like it's trying to do a bit of Blink in it. The whole like TV address thing, but it just doesn't. Yeah. It just doesn't work to the same degree at all.
Yeah, I mean, I do like a lot of experimental stories in Doctor Who. There's plenty of them that I'm a big fan of, but this isn't one of them.
Yeah, I'd agree with you. Like normally, I love it when the show tries something really different, but yeah, it just didn't. Like this one didn't work this time.
This one just really fails on most levels, and it's not like it doesn't even have a like so bad that it's good charm. It's just really dull, if you know what I mean. Yeah, and it just kind of it wastes really good actors too, and I just I think it's one of the most skippable episodes of all time. Really, like you could just not watch it and you wouldn't miss anything. You wouldn't miss anything.
Yeah, the only salvageable thing for me, like a lot of the lower point episodes in the Capaldi era, is Capaldi himself and his performance, but. Yeah. Even he doesn't get that much to do really in this, which makes it even more like even in some of the quote-unquote worst, if even that's the right word, like Capaldi episodes, if you just focus on Capaldi himself, he saves like so many scenes in other stories. He brings it out.
Yeah. I mean, like we'll get to Series 10, but there's an episode in there that I think he's excellent in and makes up for a lot of its shortcomings.
Yeah. But this one, like, because he's not given even that much to do, it's even hard to see that element in it. Yeah. Which is a shame. So. Yeah, I think, people watching, I think you can tell what we think of Sleep No More, like a lot of the fandom. Yeah. I know it has its fans, but it's just, it just didn't work. Like, fair play for trying, fair play for having a go, but it just,
I respect its ambition, but I think the execution is piss poor, to be honest.
Yeah, no, you had a go. Gold star for trying, so.
Yeah. Okay, so now we get to, like, the most important episodes of Series 9. 3-part finale, if you want to call it that. I suppose I personally count them as individual stories because they all have a distinct conclusion, but they do link to each other. So it's kind of it's a weird sort of grey area. I think we should tackle them individually. So firstly, Face the Raven. Now we're talking. So up to this point, and obviously that will change when we get to the next one after it, but up to this point, this was one of my favorite episodes in a long time. Like this was probably my favorite when this came out. This was probably my favorite episode of Doctor Who since like Series 6, like the God Complex.
Oh wow, okay.
Probably since then. This episode is phenomenal on every level. I mean, to be fair, Sarah Dollard does borrow the concept from Harry Potter, but I think she repurposes it in Doctor Who in a really interesting way. So bringing back Rigsy from Flatline was really good. I like what they did with him as well, the fact that he became like a babysitter, and also the whole thing of his mum dying, and then that whole mystery tying into the plot. The whole thing at the Trap Street, the bit at the start with Clara in the TARDIS is really good foreshadowing. It's one of the only times that random Doctor Who villains being in a story just in the background actually works really well because of the way it's executed. Yeah. The direction is excellent. I love the concept of the Raven and the tattoo on your neck and like counting down. That's awesome. And like I said before, I actually really like Ashilda in this one. I do think that it's possible that maybe it has something to do with Sarah Dollard's input in terms of the way she was characterized. I thought she was done really well. I really like her presence in this story. I like Maisie Williams' performance, and I really like the reveal of her being in contact with the Time Lords as well. I thought that was really well done. But the most important thing for me is the way it handles Clara's death and the performances from the leads.
Oh, absolutely. Yeah.
Is some of my favorite in the whole show.
And the setup as well, you know, because obviously this is the culmination of the toxicity of Clara wanting to be like the Doctor and it backfiring right at her.
I think you can make up that, like, before this episode, based on things I've said about Series 7, 8, and 9, I'm not the biggest fan of Clara. But this episode pretty much makes up for all of those things that I didn't like and turns it into this climax of her character arc that I really, really like. So at the time when I was watching this, I really, really appreciated this episode for turning my opinion around on this companion and giving her this death of where she took the responsibility of what was going to happen to Rigsy for herself, and this is part of her trying to become like the Doctor and save lives. But of course, she doesn't calculate the fact that she's still human, and she doesn't have the Doctor's ability to regenerate. So when the Raven hits her, she's actually going to die, and she doesn't calculate the fact that she can't get out of the situation once it's locked in either.
Yeah,
and therefore she has no choice but to just let it happen. And what ensues with the Doctor realizing what's happened and he had no control in it is heartbreaking. I love.
Yeah, it's that scene, isn't it? The two of them have before she goes outside. Yeah,
it's some of Peter Capaldi's best acting in the show and arguably his career. Like I put pictures up of that scene all the time of when he's holding her hands and his eyes are all pink and oh man, there's so much going on. There's so much going on that face. And then obviously after she's dead and has been hit by the Raven, you have that cliffhanger where he says, "The universe is very small when I'm angry with you." And it's that whole like one of my favorite endings and cliffhangers in Doctor Who, and I loved it.
Yeah, like seeing his sadness instantly, like as soon as Clara's dead, like seeing like his face, like because I mean we all know if Peter Capaldi can show one thing in his face very well, it's anger. Like and just the way he looks at Ashilda before he even says anything, like. Do you know what I mean? You see that shift, and it's massive. Oh yeah, and I mean, what I love about that,
I've always said that Peter Capaldi and Christopher Eccleston for me are the Doctors that are the best in like scary moments. Like they're the ones that make me the most like scared of them.
Yes, yeah, because I mean, like that. What I love about that scene as well, for all the reasons you mentioned, but also like. I know we've talked a lot about the Doctor's tonal shift and, you know, has it been earned or not, but what I love is, regardless of whether he's in midlife crisis or if he was still very spiky and edgy, like, the realization that his best friend is going to die and there's nothing he can do about it ebbs all of that away, regardless. And it's absolutely earned. But again, it was what I was saying earlier, like, the minute he comes back in that room and faces Ashilda, it's almost like that anger feels like Series 8 anger ramped up, but again, completely justified. And it's almost like that happiness, I guess, he felt, if you like, during the midlife crisis. Because even though it was a midlife crisis, like, he seemed, you know, you could argue he was more happy in general. Like, he felt more jovial. Like, that's all gone. Like, it's almost like he's almost probably kicking himself mentally. Like, this is the reason why he didn't, why he partly was the way he was in Series 8, because of this and this eventual outcome. And I think he's angry at himself, but yeah, the anger he shows at Ashildr is completely justified. Some people I've seen say he was too angry. I'm like, no, I think it's completely justified. And as you say, it's one of the best cliffhangers there.
Context? What's just happened?
Yeah, exactly. I don't know why people try and say it's not deserved, but yeah, I just think, as you said, all the performers in it are fantastic, but particularly Capaldi and Coleman in those last few minutes. Just yeah, it's some of. I don't think it's fair. It's fair to say it's some of the best acting in Doctor Who. Full stop.
I absolutely agree. It's 100%, and
I think so anyway.
And as we discussed, there are stories and moments in the Capaldi era up to this point that I did like. Like I've talked before about how I really liked, Mummy and the Orient Express and Flatline and Under the Lake Before the Flood and all that. And there's certain moments that I really liked throughout that I've talked about. But when I was watching the show for the first time, this was the moment when I finally went, aha. Like this is when it really all came together for me, the Capaldi era, this episode.
Yeah.
And it was like, it wasn't just that, because beforehand I was like, there are moments where I'm like, oh yeah, that's a good story, I like that. But this is the first time I could confidently say, I love what this show is doing, and this is something that is targeted at exactly what I look for, if that makes sense.
Yeah.
And it was very gratifying for me to finally have that moment in the Capaldi era. So absolutely hats off for Face of the Raven. I love it. There's only one thing I don't like about it, and we'll get to it when we get to Hellbent. But
okay.
But in terms of just Face of the Raven as a standalone episode, not thinking about what happens after, I love it. Brilliant story.
And I think out of all the Moffat era as well, I would argue it's the best example of how a companion death is both handled, but also how it can affect the Doctor. Yeah. Like, I know, yes, in Series 7 you've got the whole thing in the Snowmen, the Matt Smith Doctor's sad about losing Amy and Rory, but I think this shows the aftermath of what this means to the Doctor in the best way. One of
the biggest differences is that I actually don't like The Angels Take Manhattan, and one of the reasons why is because the death is actually really contrived. I don't believe that the Doctor can't see them anymore, whereas in this scenario, I absolutely believed it. That this was
it's
her
like
death.
There's nothing he can do at this point. Like, this is it. Like, yeah. And I think that lends to the impact of it as well, because I must admit, I think Moffat went for the whole let's kill a companion, but not really, a bit too often.
Yeah.
But, because obviously, like, a death in Doctor Who doesn't happen. Well, it didn't happen often, say, in Classic Who, and sadly, back in those days, they didn't really have the time, or the format wasn't there to, show the full impact of that. It's like, like when Adric dies, you have like one scene in Time Flight at the start, and that's really about it. But that was, of the time. Whereas here, like, you can't just brush it off anymore. Do you know what I mean? Like,
I will say I do really like how the Daleks Master Plan handles it with Katerina and Sarah.
Some things like that. You just need those like little lines.
Spoilers for anyone who hasn't seen that. Sorry, but like, Jesus Christ, the way Stephen and the Doctor react to those deaths. Oh.
They're so I will. Yeah, sometimes in moments like that, sometimes like a line or a moment is all you need completely. Especially since with those two, they arguably weren't with them that long.
Yeah.
Compared to Clara, for example.
Yeah.
Like, I think if the Doctor had like a moment, said one line, and then moved on, that would have felt incredibly weird and unjustified, because especially as you said, like, you've built up this thing that they are best friends, they're very close now, but there was always this thing of the underlying toxicity that Clara wants to be like the Doctor in every way, shape and form, and that has resulted in her death. Like, when you say it like that, that's like, fuck, like, that's that's big. Do you know what I mean? It's not just something you can brush off. And I just think out of companion deaths in New Who, I just think this has been handled. It was handled in the best way. In this individual episode, I know we'll get to Hellbent, but in this individual episode, the immediate aftermath is handled extremely well.
Yeah, Face Raven, absolutely hats off. And speaking of aftermath, Jesus Christ, Heaven Sent. So,
is a masterpiece, just to annoy all those people who don't think it is.
When Face the Raven came out, I was like, this is when the Capaldi era clicked for me. I was like, wow, this is actually like, this really, really, like, this is really in my ballpark. And then you get Heaven Sent, which went in even higher notch, where it was like, this is one of my favorite Doctor Who stories I've ever seen. This is like my favorite episode since like Russell left Doctor Who.
Yeah.
I was
Mad.
I was like, I hadn't felt, when I watched Heaven Sent, I hadn't felt this euphoric about the show since like The Waters of Mars. Like it was just so perfect on every level.
I mean, you have to respect like the balls of Moffat to be like, I'm gonna write an episode that is quite literally just the Doctor.
Yeah.
Like, for a modern day TV audience, I've got a lot of problems with him, but I've got to respect him for even being like, yeah, we're doing this.
Well, I think it's one of the best things Moffat's ever done is Heaven Sent.
Yeah, no, absolutely.
You have obviously it's the aftermath of Face the Raven. So part of it is obviously the success of what happened in the previous episode, really elevating my interest in this Doctor and this companion's relationship because of how it handled that and really repaired a lot of things I didn't like. So going off that, you then have Heaven Sent, which is all about that grief. And it handles it in just this such beautiful way. And it's so dark and so fucked up and so uplifting at the end. And Peter Capaldi's performance is one of the best in the show. Rachel Talalay's direction is one of the best in the show. Murray Gold's score is one of the best in the show. And Moffat's script is one of the best in the show. And it's just an absolute masterpiece. And I know that it's a cliche to say it, but it just is.
Yeah, it just, I mean, I feel I can't add much more. It just, yeah, I mean, for anyone who's seen it, hopefully you can understand where we're coming from. I mean, for me, I remember at the time, because I think, again, we knew it was coming. I think it was teased in, like, Doctor Who magazine that we were going to get an episode where it was just Capaldi, basically. I think that was known. I remember at the time thinking, I hadn't seen anything like that before. So I was like, I don't know how this can work. But I thought, if there's any actor who could make it work, it's probably Peter Capaldi. And yeah, the whole fucked up notion of it. For me, it's like when you realise that he's killing himself over and over again. Do you know what I mean? It's not just like a reset.
The visual storytelling of when they pan from his face to the skull. Oh
yeah,
so good.
Oh man. Or even little moments like when you see his like scorched hand like hit the sand and things like that. It's just like it's not a moment of he's not dead. He's just being like transported back to the beginning. It's like no, he dies.
There's so much foreshadowing from the very start of the episode all the way up to when he burns his brains out. It's so good.
Yeah.
And the whole setting and the Veil as a villain and it's also like, because I'm not like I find a lot of the some of the Moffat monologuing and the sort of breaking the fourth wall stuff a bit weird in some of the other episodes, but in this one it's so earned. Like the fact that he's the only character in it means that him monologuing and him talking to the camera actually has a story purpose. And all the dialogue is so well written, and mate, I could talk about Heaven Sent for ages.
Yeah, I must say, what do you think about the one thing that I think about in retrospect though is, even though Capaldi, he's the only actor in it, but there is that one scene, that small scene, where he's in his mind in the TARDIS, and I know it's a mental projection. We do very briefly see Jenna Coleman as Clara. Yeah. What did you think about that scene? In the context of it all.
Well, you're obviously talking about the bit where she puts her hand on his face, and
you get up off your ass and you be a doctor or whatever she says.
And win or something like that. I think it really fits the moment, and it's just like it's the exact moment of encouragement he needs to break through that wall.
Sort of like a reminder of why he's doing it in the. Like partly why he's doing it in the first place. Because do you think right from the off? I can't remember if it's said in Face the Raven, but I mean we talked about there that sort of the finality in that moment of Clara's death. At that moment there's nothing he can do to stop it. It's happening. It's happened. I can't remember if it's said in Face the Raven, but do you think from that moment that he enters the confession dial, his aim is not just to get to Gallifrey, but he's going to save Clara, which obviously is shown in Hellbent. But I mean, do you think that was a thought he had right from the off?
Well, I mean, I wouldn't. When the episode came out, I wouldn't have known that. It's only something that you can know.
Sure, I mean, in retrospect,
right?
Yeah.
Yeah. So this is something that I've had pointed out to me, and unfortunately, that does disappoint me. But we'll get to that. We'll get to Hellbent when we talk about that.
Yeah.
But that's not how I interpreted the episode. I saw it more as it was more about him dealing with the grief of losing her, and obviously he does physically break through an actual wall, but it's also metaphorically him breaking through that wall that's been put in front of him because of this grief. And it's kind of a metaphor for when you're in a depressive cycle, this is what it feels like getting out of it. It feels like you're spending so much time punching this wall to break free. And that's what I got from it. I never saw it as him being motivated to save her because, well, obviously because I had no concept of how that could happen. In my mind, in Face the Raven, the stakes were set up in the sense that there was absolutely no way of saving her.
Yeah.
I assumed that it was a fixed point. Like, it was just something that couldn't be undone.
Yeah. And I think I agree. Like, when I watched it, as you say, it is like a great way of explaining how grief can affect someone and how grief makes you feel, like you say, punching the metaphorical wall. And I think it's... Sorry, go on.
I also think that I don't think there's any dialogue in Heaven Sent that suggests that because... And I would even say there's even dialogue that's contrary to that. There's a bit where he's in his TARDIS, obviously not the actual TARDIS, but in his mind palace or whatever. And he says, no matter what I do, you'll still be dead. And I think that really hits home because it really outlines that there is absolutely no way he can bring her back. And he has to deal with that. And I think it's a really relatable thing to people in real life who have people that they love die and they can never come back. And it's showing on almost a super level, because obviously he's a Time Lord and has a completely different life and whatnot, but it's showing metaphorically what it's like to have to deal with that reality. The fact that despite the fact that this is a time travel show where you can go and alter history and whatnot, you can go and travel anywhere, and there's certain people that have certain magic powers and whatnot, but at the end of the day, there are some things that are permanent, and I really liked that. I really liked that approach, where it was hinting at that there are so many things that the Doctor can do, and he's an amazing man that can save lives and whatnot, but there are some things that he can't, and I think that, to me, is more resonant than the idea of him saving Clara.
I love that scene. I mean, of the performance, the way when Capaldi says it, you still won't be there, and he just sort of like crumbles to the floor of the TARDIS. It's just, as you say, it hits. But you believe him. I mean, the job of any actor is to make what you're delivering believable. If the audience don't believe it, then you've lost it. But I think that's one thing I would argue Capaldi does all the way through his 3 years, is he makes every scene, every situation, stakes, consequences, he makes them believable. Do you know what I mean? You believe this is... And that was one thing I had an issue with Matt Smith's era. I think partly it was the scripts he was given, not necessarily his... Well, you could argue maybe his performance in places, but I'd argue it was more the scripts. But there were some moments where, you're meant to believe this being, and I just didn't. Do you know what I mean? Whereas with Capaldi, I never sort of had that. And I'm not trying to... I'm not being like, oh, I'm a Capaldi stan, but I'm talking literally about an acting perspective. Yeah. If that makes sense. Like, as an actor, I believe everything Capaldi says. Like, to the jot.
Yes. Well, I mean, I think part of that is down to the fact that I think that Matt Smith's scripts often were mismatched to his acting style. Because I think he's quite a specialist actor, and I think a lot of what Moffat wrote him into wasn't his strength. Some of it was, but there are parts where, like you say, there's a lack of believability. I think one that comes to mind is in Victory of the Daleks, when he's, is that scene where he confronts the Dalek, and I don't find that rage he displays very believable.
No.
Whereas if you look at something like Into the Dalek, when you see the way he confronts the Dalek in that, Capaldi does, I absolutely 100% believe it.
Absolutely. It's sort of that matching it, which is why I'm saying I'm not trying to critique Matt Smith as a whole as an actor. Yeah, of course. It was more about like it's also the job of the writer to match the tone of the actor and the style that they're going for, especially for a role like Doctor Who as well.
Well, I don't think that Matt Smith, especially in his late 20s, had extreme levels of range. That may have changed now, because I know he's played Prince Philip in The Crown. But but I think that there are examples where they do write him in tone and roles that are believable. Like, I think there are, especially like tender moments. I think Matt Smith's very good at that. But like you say, there are just certain things that he did that just weren't as believable. Whereas with Capaldi, like you say, he has a lot of experience. He's phenomenal, and he has a lot of range, and therefore a lot of the things he does is believable.
Yeah, completely. And I mean, no more is that, like, for a script like Heaven Sent, where it is just one principal actor, like, you need the believability. Do you know, like, if you're not believable in a story like that, then the story's just failed instantly. You know, it doesn't matter how well it's written. If you don't believe the one actor who's in it, then you've already lost. But no, he absolutely carries it, and I reckon it deserves all the praise it gets. Yeah. And it's a nice, I mean, the cliffhanger as well. I enjoyed the cliffhanger. You know, the revelation that we are back on Gallifrey.
Yeah, again, this was partly ruined by the marketing. I wish they hadn't shown it in the trailers, or told us about it in the synopsis. But yeah, like it's a great twist. Like, if you haven't seen the show and you don't know anything about what's going to happen next, it's a great twist.
Yeah. Well, it was like the Americans I watched it with in this season. I think I told them about Gallifrey. You know, it's the home planet of the Time Lords and stuff.
Yeah.
And then when they heard that in Heaven Sent, they were like, "Oh my god! Like, is this it? Is this it? Do you know what I mean?" So, like you say, for something like that, it's the best effect. You know.
Yeah. Though, having said that, and this will slowly transition into the next episode, but this also harkens back to an issue I have with Day of the Doctor. I feel like it's kind of a blessing and a curse. Because on one hand, we get this amazing moment we finally see Gallifrey and New Who for the first time, and like the Doctor's back. But I also think, and this, like I said, I don't like in Day of the Doctor when Gallifrey is brought back. So so that is riding on it. Now, I think at the time I didn't have this opinion, so maybe my perspective was different. But thinking about it now that I've changed my mind on the Day of the Doctor decision that was made, there is a slight sourness to it, because I know not only did I not agree with what set it up in Day of the Doctor, but I also obviously don't like what happens after. And not just in Hellbent, I'm also referring to what happens in Series 12 as well, with Gallifrey. So
yep.
So in the end, whilst I really like the end of Heaven Sent, and I think it's a great way to end it, on the whole, I would have just preferred if they didn't bring back Gallifrey at all.
Okay, yeah, that's fair.
So that is one slight sour note. It's not Heaven Sent's fault necessarily, but it is one slight sour note. I also there is also one small detail about Heaven Sent that does rankle me a little bit, and it's not necessarily explicitly said, but it's definitely hinted at, is that it's explained that is that bit where he's telling confessions about why he ran away from Gallifrey, and it kind of retcons the War Games a little bit, because it sort of...
but I mean, all you got in the War Games was just him saying, "Oh, I was bored," really.
Yeah, so it's almost like he was so fed up with the Time Lords and their ways, and he wanted to escape and travel and live a fun life, and all that. But then in Heaven Sent, it's like saying actually he was scared, and then it's hinted at that the reason why he might be scared is because of the hybrid, which is something we will get into when we get to Hellbent. Basically, what I'm saying is that it doesn't make the episode fall apart or anything, but it's a risky move to make that retcon, because now you're changing the reason why the Doctor left Gallifrey, which is a very major part of this show and the lore.
Yeah.
So basically what I'm saying is that if you're going to make that change, you have to make it pay off in a way that's going to be satisfying. And of course, that's when we get to Hellbent.
Everyone's favourite episode of Doctor Who.
So, and I have I've been dreading talking about it because I've been enjoying talking about Heaven Sent. So I suppose where I should start with Hellbent is what I think I need to establish is that something that I see a lot of people on Twitter saying that are Hellbent fans is that a lot of people just don't understand it. And whilst that may have some truth, I want to put it on the table whether or not I understand what happens in Hellbent.
Okay.
And then once we establish that, then we can go into why I don't like it. The prophecy identified the hybrid as being born of two warrior races and said that one day the hybrid would stand in the ruins of Gallifrey and unravel the web of time and destroy a billion hearts to heal its own. And so from what I've been explained about the hybrid arc from people that are big fans of Series 9, is they have explained that the two warrior races isn't half Time Lord, half Dalek. It's actually, the interpretation is more the relationship between the Doctor and Clara is what the hybrid is meant to be. And then destroying a billion hearts is meant to reference what happens in Heaven Sent. Unraveling the web of time is meant to be when... I could be wrong on this, but I believe it's meant to be when he pulls her out of time. Is that correct? Yeah.
That's how I've interpreted it, because I think what you were saying about a fixed point, I think they might say it specifically, but like when they're in that room, you know, where he can see her, he hasn't got her yet, and they imply that if he does this will unravel the web of time. So they might not say fixed point explicitly, but I would argue that's pretty much an implication that this is a fixed, because if it wasn't a fixed point, if it was just a flux, then it wouldn't have any implications whether he got her or not. So I would argue it is that moment that would instigate the said unraveling of the web of time.
And also the hybrid would stand in the ruins of Gallifrey, which I can't actually remember explicitly what that meant by the ruins of Gallifrey. I had it told to me by Tempo at some point, but I can't remember what it was. And then also I find it quite funny how some people have interpreted the Timeless Children as the hybrid is the Cybermasters and the ruins of Gallifrey is what the master did to it. And I almost think Chris Chibnall was doing that as a dig at the hybrid.
Maybe. Hey, it very well could have been. They are hybrids after all. So on a technical level.
Yeah. Anyway, so I think I understand what happens, and I hope I do, because that means that there's not going to be confusion, right? Now, obviously, there are, with Moffat's writing, there is always interpretation involved, so that is going to be part of it. But in terms of what actually happens in the story, I'm pretty sure I know what happens. So, with that said, do you want me to tell you why I don't like Hellbent?
I've heard many people say why, so yeah, let's do it.
Well, I mean, I'm sure there's a lot of things you've heard before, but see, because the funny thing is a lot of people say it's all about the advertising, and then people will respond of, oh, that's the BBC's fault for adding Gallifrey and hyping that up, and it's like, yes, that is part of it, but I still don't like it even in universe. So I'm going to completely remove the marketing from the equation, because I don't think that counts. Because if the marketing counted, then that would discount a lot of other stories that I like. But just purely looking at from in-universe, why I don't like Hellbent, well, there's a lot of reasons, but the core reason why is that it all comes back to, at the end of the day, because there's a lot of things that happen, but at the end of the day, what it comes back to is, I don't find what they do with the Doctor's character in that episode believable. I don't buy that he has become such a different person that he would do the things he does. And I also don't like that Stephen Moffat created a device to allow Clara to be brought out of time. I don't like that exists. I don't like that that's a physically possible thing to do. And also it does raise a lot of questions about, like, well, what if this technology could be used again to save other companions, blah 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 blah. But I don't like that there is something in the Doctor universe that exists that can bring people out of their death and make them immortal until they want to die. I just don't like, at its core, I do not like that idea. And like many people have said, for me personally, it undermines everything I loved about Faith Raven and Heaven Sent, and about that the impact of her death and the repercussions of it and what came after it. And I don't think that fundamentally telling a story about going back in time and saving someone that's dead is something that people can relate to, because it's not something that human beings can do. Now, to be fair, obviously Doctor Who is not about human beings. It's a very supernatural show, and the Doctor's a Time Lord and all that. And it's, you know, there is an avenue to tell larger-than-life stories. But at the same time, I don't see why there is a reason for this to happen. I don't see why it is worth digging Clara out from her death just to make this point about the Doctor and Clara's relationship being toxic and them becoming a hybrid. And
Yeah.
I just...
Because you could argue maybe we've already seen that in Face the Raven. Like, that was the whole
and
culmination of it.
And I just think that also, like, oh God, I hate saying it like this, but there is so much you could have done if you were going to bring back Gallifrey. And in a lot of ways, what they do is they use Gallifrey as a setting to stage this story. And not necessarily that that's a wrong thing, but I just feel like this was the wrong time to do it, because this is the first time we've seen Gallifrey and New Who with the Doctor on it.
Yeah.
And it was a very ballsy move to make, but I don't think it was one that was right. And then there's all the like nitty gritty things that I don't like as well. I don't like the way Rassilon's written. I don't like the way the General's written. I do not like Ashilda in that and how she's handled with her immortality. I don't think that leaving the hybrid up to interpretation actually works, because it makes the conclusion muddy, and it makes it difficult, because rather than it being an avenue of there are so many things that you can think about what happens, but they all have a fundamentally really impactful conclusion, it's more so I just don't think that unless you research what's actually happening that you can really fully get it. And then
Sure.
And then there's also the fact that at the end of the story, Clara, who's now immortal until she decides to go back and die, and Ashilda, who is immortal and doesn't even have to decide anything, she's just immortal, get their own TARDIS, and Clara just kind of becomes her own Doctor, except even more powerful and immortal and untouchable, and it kind of rewards her for her efforts. And I get that some people really like that because they think that people shouldn't be punished for being a good person. But like I said before, I don't think that's a compelling story. I think it's a false fantasy, and it's one that doesn't resonate with me and doesn't resonate with a lot of people I know. And I'm not saying that you can't like Hellbent. Obviously you can, but personally, just as a fan of Doctor Who, a fan of this character, a fan of the previous 2 episodes, fan of what Russell T Davies built up about the Time War, about Gallifrey, a fan of the War Games and all that stuff, and just a film critic in general, I fundamentally don't think this works. Okay.
No, and that's all, you know, I'll preface that by saying that's all fair enough. I can see your reasoning completely. I'll do the opposite. I'll start with my negatives, and the one big thing I agreed with you on is the ending. The notion that Clara not only survives, but gets her own TARDIS and buggers off to who knows where, I think ruins the rest of the... Well, not ruins, but it spoils the rest of the story. Because, for me, like we said about Heaven Sent, right? It's this way of dealing with grief, like we've established. You know, the Doctor believes Clara's gone, that's it, and he's finding a way to deal with it. Then he realises he's on Gallifrey. And I've always, even from broadcast, I interpret it as that shifts him again. Because now he's like, right, I'm on Gallifrey. This means I can do shit, basically. And like you say, yeah, I know about the thing of taking people out of time from their death. We've seen things like take people out of time before, maybe not necessarily from their death. I mean, it's implied in Trial of a Time Lord with Perry, like the Matrix manipulation stuff.
Yeah.
But I'd say it's sort of an evolution of that. But it's the first time, we see someone actually pulled from their death. I've always seen it as...
I mean, to be fair, it does happen in Father's Day, but the only way it can be resolved is by Pete voluntarily being run over.
Is a death, yeah. Is a life for a life sort of thing. But yeah, I as soon as he's on Gallifrey, I think he realizes he can. I think if he'd have just been spat back, this what if scenario. But I think if he'd have he comes out the confession dial, if he was back on Earth, I don't think he would go to the lengths he does in Hellbent. I think it's because he's on Gallifrey. He knows that the time, like you mentioned about Ashilda communicating with the Time Lords, and just a general, because let's face it, he's always had a chip on his shoulder about his own race, particularly like the High Council and the aristocracy of it. And I think given what he's just been through, even though it's overcoming grief, I think This is just my personal take. I'll say this now, and if you don't agree with it, that's completely fair. It's just an interpretation. Grief, as we said, throws up a lot of emotions in you, and that sort of barrier we talked about. And whilst the barrier is there to be broken down, I believe when you're grieving, it is also a rife time where your emotions can shift drastically, almost on a dime. Is that fair to say? That's how I know I felt like that during grief.
Well, this, I mean, sorry to interrupt if you don't mind.
No, go ahead.
But this all stems back to the fact that that could work if I believed it.
Okay.
But the reason why I don't believe it is because I don't think that level of shift through his grief, I don't think that's earned due to how his relationship with Clara is written compared to other companions.
Okay.
I don't think that it's organically strong enough to the point where he would, kill the general in cold blood, for example. And this is part of where I feel like Moffat is forcing her importance on the Doctor's life rather than showing us why. Because
sort of like what we talked about with Listen.
Yeah, and I think I think a really good example to show, because obviously one of my biggest critiques is the Doctor being out of character, but the thing is that in contrast to that, there is an episode in New Who where the Doctor is out of character that I love, and that's The Waters of Mars.
Yes.
But the reason why I love that and I don't love this is because I actually think that the Doctor's switch and going out of character in Waters of Mars is actually earned. And I can actually pinpoint to you all of the reasons why that shift happens. Mm-hmm. Whereas in Hellbent, I can't. And it's so jarring to me that I personally really don't like it.
I've always thought the scene in Hellbent, when he's in the barn, and there's that, the moments where he's coming in and out. Again, you could probably accuse me of this being headcanon, but this is a god honest interpretation, right? From when I first watched it on broadcast. It's yes, he's being standoffish, with the general and all that sort of stuff. But I also see that maybe as him in those moments in the barn, because the barn is significant because it's where he made a big decision, as we saw in Day of the Doctor.
Yeah.
And I've almost felt it's repeating that again. He's aware, like I said, he's back on Gallifrey. He knows instantly that he has the means to try and do something. But I'd always argue that barn scene in Hellbent is him sort of self-contemplating whether he should, if that makes sense. And again, yes, that isn't said. That isn't explicitly said. We're not necessarily given any clear implications, so I completely admit you could just call it headcanon. But I just think because of the significance of the barn and how Capaldi's Doctor is in those scenes, I would argue it's almost the way the General and then Rassilon, how they conduct themselves, that sort of pushes him over the edge to start doing what he does.
Yeah, I get what you're saying.
Yeah, I'm not saying I'm right. That's just my
Of course.
interpretation.
Yeah,
so.
I mean, again, it's is this the point where Moffat is pushing it so far into interpretation that it becomes difficult? Because it's
well, no, I agree with you there, because someone said to me once, it's interpretation's fine, but fundamentally any piece of drama, what it's trying to communicate should be, like we said at the start, sort of surface to a degree where people can pick that up. It shouldn't necessarily... interpretation's great, but the fundamental aspects of a story shouldn't be, up to us all to fill in the gaps, so to speak. And I agree on that. There is a lot of Hellbent that isn't said. I will lean into that, absolutely.
Yeah. I do think you have to give something as an indicator to... it doesn't have to be... you don't have to do, the Chris Chibnall thing of just delivering exposition telling you exactly what it is, because that would be boring. But what I'm saying is that there has to be something that triggers a thought that then leads you to conclude that happening. And obviously it worked for you because you saw the way the Doctor was acting and you saw the significance of the barn and you put those two together. But I think there needed to be another step made in the execution
Yeah.
to really hammer that home, because I feel like you can have interpretation, but there are some things you have to make clear so that people can understand what's happening, if that makes sense.
Yes, I feel if they'd emphasize, because even though there's all these emotions, the Doctor's back home. He's found Gallifrey, and that could be those moments with the, I don't know what you call them, like the villagers, like the people who are by the barn. Maybe if we'd seen a moment, even Idala, if we'd seen a moment where we see his joy at being back on Gallifrey, if that makes sense, like that first, and that might, you see a sway of like, oh, maybe he's not going to do what he thought he could do. But then Rassilon arrives, as the instigator, the one who sort of provokes him with the way he is, and that maybe tips. Do you know what I mean? We need it, that, because that's how I interpret it. But I feel that should have been shown more.
Yeah. Also, there's a bunch of like plot things in there, like Rassilon's glove. Like we don't really know what powers he actually has. We see what he does with it in End of Time, but like I just don't really believe when Rassilon quote unquote loses at the start of Hellbent, because I'm like, well, can't he just like vaporize them?
Yeah. It's like I do agree. Like even if it was a small thing of like if somehow they got the glove away from him, then it's a bit more believable, because then he's just.
I will say this is a rare moment when you're going to hear me praise Hellbent. I will say I do really, and this is unfortunately something that Chris Chibnall has changed, but I will say there is that one line of dialogue from Rassilon where he says, "How many regenerations did we give you?"
Yeah.
I love that, because it means that we have no idea how long the Doctor has left.
Yeah, it's ambiguous. Yeah.
I do like that, and of course the timeless child thing has probably changed that. But it was one moment in Hellbent that added to the Doctor's lifespan that I thought was good, because it left his life ambiguous.
Yes. Yeah, and that was hinted in, I think, again in Kill the Moon. When they first arrive on the base, and he's like, "Oh, you can shoot me, but I'll just keep on regenerating. Like, I'm not sure for how long, but or he says, yeah, I like that, those moments in the, because obviously Capaldi's the first incarnation of the new life cycle, if you like. So I sort of like those moments where we get that sort of ambiguity as to how long does he have.
Yeah, it's like, have they given me another 13? Have they only given me another life? Have they given me like a lot of lives? It's like you have no idea.
Yeah. Just to point out, you mentioned about shooting the general in cold blood.
Yeah.
That the moment itself, like the Doctor shooting down a member of his own race in cold blood, like you said, I know it's different, but like in the Waters of Mars, we see the Doctor sort of, break his own rules, go that one step beyond. And I know he doesn't explicitly kill anyone in that story, like not himself. He doesn't pull the trigger. But we are aware in the show that the Doctor has taken lives. This isn't brand new information.
Yes.
So the idea that he's already broken his own rules by bringing Clara back, the only way I can I sort of relate to it is, like when either you're really angry or upset, and there's the phrase "you see red," where like you just you lean into whatever emotion you're feeling, and in that moment there's nothing you or anyone else can do to sort of dissuade you from it. Yes. That's the sort of moment I took away from it. He saved Clara. He instantly realised the implications, what everyone's telling him. He saw red, and he did what he did. And the only problem I have with it, and it makes me sound horrible, like, I'm not saying the Doctor should kill people all the time, but like the concept of it, I'm fine with. I think the way the dialogue is written, how he just crassly says, "Oh, well, what regeneration are you on? Good luck then." Like, I think that spoils it for me, because it's no longer a blind decision of anger, which sometimes I think doesn't help, but I think in this case might have actually helped better if it was just like a blind sort of out of control thing. But that line sort of makes it seem like it is controlled.
It's a bit more calculated than seeing red.
Exactly. Whereas I just think the seeing red analogy, you start to see it, but then as soon as he says, "Oh, what regeneration are you on?" it just, that notion's gone, because you're not seeing red. So.
I also personally really don't like the comedy in that scene. It's so like out of place. Like you got the bit where he's like, "Don't take a selfie," and then and then you've got like the Doctor, like the Doctor's just killed someone and they've regenerated. It's like, what the hell's going on here? And then she stands up and makes a joke about men having ego, and it's like, was that really necessary? I mean, it's like it's just sort of it felt like very wrong place, wrong time to have a joke like that. And then
I feel Moffat does that a lot, though. I think Moffat sometimes is whether either afraid or just like he'll do a moment, like a big moment, whether it's a shock or an emotional thing, and then more often than not he'll think, "Oh God, I've got to make this funny. Like I can't." And again, whether it's intentional, it just seems that way. Of course, there are moments where the comedy's not there. Like as we said, Clara's death in Face the Raven. There's no comedy like that. You know, that is that. But that should have been the case for, as you say, this bit in Hellbent. Like it should have felt more impactful than just being brushed off with a joke. And I feel Moffat does that a lot in his tenure with big moments like that.
Yeah, and obviously, like it's funny because people often compare it like because there's obviously that scene in End of Time where he's in the diner with Wilf and he's talking about how, you know, even if I regenerate, it feels like dying and all that. And then in Hellbent, he says to Clara, "Oh, the regeneration, it's like man flu."
yeah, it's this thing of contradiction. And, you know, I know Doctor Who, you know, it's a big, long-running show and there's lots of points to consider.
Yeah, of course.
But yeah, but that could have been avoided if you just didn't make that wisecrack. Like, that could have easily been avoided.
Yeah, I mean, it's possible that he's just lying to her to avoid the conversation.
Could
and
be.
Just makes a joke. Yeah. But it's just, again, just tonally, it's just such wrong place, wrong time. Like, these jokes that we're talking about, like, out of context just now, I do actually think they're quite funny. But when I'm in the moment watching Hellbent, I really don't like them they're lined up, if that makes sense.
No, absolutely. I mean, I think, again, because people often refer to that scene where he shoots him down, like, again, I can buy the concept that in a moment of blind rage, the Doctor would do that, because we do know the Doctor, reluctantly or otherwise, is capable of shooting down people. Yeah. But, again, the way in which it, like we said throughout all this video, the way in which it was executed, sort of, it makes me think I have to headcanon that notion more than it actually should have been.
Yes, so to sort of go back to something I was saying before is that I don't have to headcanon with the Waters of Mars because I can actually tell you what...
Exactly.
I can actually tell you why he turns into the Time Lord victorious.
And arguably, like we're saying, you get that as an audience, but even on the surface level, like there's something to go on there.
And I think this is just in general, and I know obviously this is some people are going to sigh because I say this all the time and it's going to get tiring to hear. But this is just something that I prefer about Russell T Davies over Stephen Moffat, is that I feel like a lot of his emotional beats and big dramatic moments are very well built up to, and when they happen, I believe them and they're earned. Whereas I find a lot of Stephen Moffat's beats are quite forced, and I can't buy into them because of that.
No, and I think that's just a fair natural reaction as an audience member. You know, we want to buy into these scenarios, and the more it makes us sound lazy, but sort of like the more work we have to do to get into that scenario ruins it. You want it presented to you, and then you make that final click. Like we're the final piece of the puzzle, if that's a good analogy.
Like think for example, if like in Last of the Time Lords, if the whole time like Lucy Saxon was the same way she was in Sound of Drums, where she's like very like happy to be, you know, the Master's wife, and she's all like, you know, joyful. And then just suddenly out of nowhere at the end, she shoots him. It would be so jarring. But because we get that foreshadowing in Sound of Drums where Vivian Rook says to her, you know, he's a monster, and you can sort of see under her breath, she sort of knows it, but is kind of denying it. And then obviously in Last of the Time Lords, you see that she has bruises on her face. She does not look happy. She looks very reluctant to be there. There's a lot of foreshadowing. And because of that, it means that when she shoots him, it all clicks. And I'm like, of course she is, because I've just been shown all of these reasons why.
I think that's where, like, because, I mean, you know, if I shut my brain off, I enjoy Hellbent anyway. Like, I think it's, you know, it's decently paced, there's some good moments, but I've just thought, overall, I'd enjoy it even more if most of the actions in it was the Doctor, as we said, in this sort of either, like, you know, blind rage, seeing red, or, you know, seeing one train of thought, and then right at the, I guess it sort of happens when they're in the TARDIS and he realizes that he can't pull this off, you know. I just think the come down would have been better if he was in that sort of one state of mind, because then I also think it shows, as we said earlier, the Doctor isn't this perfect being, you know. He should be capable of seeing rage, like, you know, he should be capable of exhibiting the emotions of his deadliest enemies. Like, the Daleks are pretty much, for the most part, blind rage. And I'd argue it would be more interesting to see the Doctor in that state, not all the time, but, for this instance, and then the come down from that. Because the come down in Waters of Mars, when he realises that, the captain's shot herself, and it's inadvertently because of him, you see that come down.
Yeah.
You see that him fall off that pedestal. And it's sort of the same in Hellbent when he realises he can't really save Clara properly. But I feel it just would have been more impactful if his manner was more of that sort of, out of control, I'm seeing one line of thinking here, rather than, as you said, like that more calculated approach.
And also, because of my interpretation of Heaven Sent, in that, because of the dialogue that's presented in there, and what I was saying before about how he confesses that he left Gallifrey because he was scared, and it's suggested that the hybrid was part of the reason why.
Yeah. What
that means is that the relationship between the Doctor and Clara now has a massive impact on... I mean, it already did. When you think about the name of the Doctor, which she's the Impossible Girl, she already was, superimposed on the show already. But it's just doing... Yeah. And then obviously the barn scene in Listen, too, when she helps to sort of inspire his fear and becoming like a doctor and all that. But once again, it's writing home the message of Clara's importance on the Doctor's life, and it's suggesting that his relationship with her and them being the hybrid is part of why he left Gallifrey in the first place. And like I've said many times, if I could actually buy this, and if I didn't feel like it was forced, I could maybe let that slide. But because I don't buy it, I feel like it really does a lot of damage for me, because it means that a relationship the Doctor has with a companion that I don't care for is now part of the entire show, if that makes sense.
Yes. Yeah. No, I hear you. And I mean, the whole hybrid thing, you could argue, was a misfire anyway. I mean, I know it was sort of done as like, oh, we need the repeated phrase for the season, but I feel you could do Hellbent just as well without the whole hybrid thing. I will say the ending where like he forgets her, I'd argue that's heartbreaking enough that one of them has to forget in concept. But I think again it would have been even more heartbreaking if he forgot and then Clara took the TARDIS back to Gallifrey and put herself back to her death, and then he wakes up but obviously doesn't know her and doesn't know that she ultimately did the right thing. I think that'd be more heartbreaking.
I actually thought she was there was a weird inconsistency with her character, because earlier in the episode she says, I have the right to my death, but then
she does,
but then later on she says the long way around.
Yeah. I mean, I thought, like, is it this, I mean, the idea of prolonging your death, I mean, it's this, they say it's this human thing, isn't it, that we're all afraid of death, because it's one of the two certain things, life and death.
Yeah.
But again, if like Clara's saying it, it's again more of this thing of indication. We should have had more of an indication that maybe when the chips are down at the end of it all, she might be like, oh, I'm actually quite scared to go back and die. And that's why she's prolonging it. Yeah, but again, it's like it is just sort of like a lol joke moment. We're going to travel the long way around.
It was way more playful, and like I've said before, it was saccharine, as Moffat likes to have it be.
Yeah, I just like in my, as fans, in my ideal world, Clara, still have to think the Doctor forgets Clara, but then Clara makes the decision to put herself back in Trap Street.
Yeah, and now... I also have something to say about the Doctor forgetting Clara thing as well. Okay, so this thing has been done before. We've seen it with Jamie and Zoe in the War Games, and we've seen it with Donna in Journey's End. Mm-hmm. So with Jamie and Zoe in the War Games, I think it works brilliantly. And part of the reason why is that the Doctor has to leave everything behind. It's not just the TARDIS, but it's his companions as well. And so going forward, I think it really works leading into season 7, because now there's justification for why the Doctor is so angry and like quite on edge throughout season 7 and parts of season 8, is because not only did the Time Lords take his TARDIS away, but they also took away 2 of his best friends, and they forgot about him. So there's a lot of aftermath to that happening, if that makes sense. And then in Journey's End, again, like Donna forgetting the Doctor, it has a direct impact on him right after it happens. Obviously, you get the bit at the end of Journey's End as well. But then also going into the specials and his last few stories, Donna not being there has a very direct impact on him, and obviously that all boils over in Waters of Mars and End of Time as well.
Yeah.
So the purposes of those I really like. The problem I have with the one in Hellbent, though, is that the person who's forgotten is the one that is actually the point of view character that we see going forward.
Sure.
And so it doesn't have as many repercussions as I would have liked, because it's different. Because of, obviously, if it was in season 7, the Doctor's mind was wiped and he forgot Jamie and Zoe, then I feel like that wouldn't have worked as well. And if it was a case of like the Doctor's mind was wiped and he forgot Donna, I don't think that would have worked as well, because it just would have been a false finish. Whereas here, we don't see what happens to Clara after he forgets her, because she goes off and has her adventures and then goes to die. And then with the Doctor, he forgets her, and then obviously you can't really follow up on that because he doesn't remember who she is. And obviously when we get to series 10, we'll talk about what they do in Twice Upon a Time.
Yeah,
but
yeah.
I feel like using the ending in this way, whilst, you know, I can see in concept why it would be a cool twist to turn it on its head, instead of having Clara forget the Doctor, it's the Doctor forgets Clara, to change it up a bit. In execution, I don't think it has any real lasting value. And rather than it having an impact going forward, it instead makes me feel like a lot of what they did was kind of pointless, and it undervalues a lot of them together, if that makes sense. And I understand the purpose behind why they did it is that they're toxic for each other, therefore one of them forgetting means that they won't have to be together. But I just, it doesn't sit right with me.
No, that's fair. I think the notion, as soon as he thought, right, I'm going to do something where we're forgetting, it was a rock and a hard place, because if he'd have done it to Clara, everyone would have just been like, oh, well, this is Donna all over again. And as you said, like, yeah, wiping the Doctor's memory does bring inherent problems down the line, because, as you say, it's hard to have that payoff. However, annoyingly, there are, like, I think the best, if you are going to have him forget, the best way to honour it is if you have almost like subtle moments where you think he might remember, or there's like, because those do happen, just not in the main show. Like, you know that in the first episode of Class where he appears, he sees C. Oswald on the name of those lost, and he puts his hand on it, and it's just, you know, it's a small thing, and you know there's no dialogue to suggest that he remembers.
I think there's I think there's a bit in the pilot as well when he
apparently that's a deleted scene where he's playing. I think we see him playing in the episode, but the deleted scene is where we hear what he's playing Clara's theme, and Bill says, what's that called? And yeah,
there's that. But what I'm saying is there's that also that bit where he's gonna wipe Bill's memory, and then she says, "What would happen if someone that did that to you?"
Oh yeah, and he sort of stops a minute. Yeah. I think that's It's not the best outcome, but I feel if you're gonna honor it properly, that would have been the best way to do it. I suppose just have little trimmings, and then yes, I know when we get to Twice Upon a Time, we'll talk about what happens there. But I must admit, at the time on broadcast, I feel like a lot of these tropes in Series 9, they worked the best at the time on first broadcast. You know, when you don't know what's coming next. So the idea that the Doctor is going to forget rather than the companion actually hit quite hard for me, because it was something different, and with all they'd been through, it was going to be a loss for either of them, but more so for the Doctor in this case.
Yeah.
And on first broadcast, that hit me the hardest. And again, the whole thing with Clara and even actually the scene in the diner, before it's revealed she has a TARDIS, when you realise, because obviously Hellbent starts, with the whole diner thing, and you're like, why is he talking to Clara like he doesn't know her? But that scene after he forgets in the diner before she goes into her TARDIS, I think hit me even more. Because now, now it's like you realise, you understand why they seem so weird in that diner setting, and that she can't tell him because it wouldn't make any sense to him, and he's so confused. And then even though I said, Clara going back to her death would have been better, even if it had ended there, he walks out the diner and she's still there, like looking as he goes, knowing that she has the memories but he doesn't, and even if we don't see her death, I think even that would have been more impactful than her going off in the TARDIS.
Just a question.
Shoot, go for it.
Do you think maybe having Clara ask the Doctor to tell her about Clara is maybe a little bit egotistical?
Yeah, I'll answer yes, but I think we've already established that Clara is somewhat of an egotistical character anyway.
Yeah,
so I buy it. But yes, when you put it like that, yes, it is a bit egotistical. But if that was, say, I don't know, if that was I'm trying to think of something. Say if that was I don't know, like Donna doing it, you'd be like, whoa, what? It'd feel more weird. Yeah. I never found it weird that Clara asked about Clara, because that's the most Clara thing she could do.
Yeah.
And I guess if you think, again, you could argue it's more I'm having to do the work as the audience member, but you could also argue it's more of like she knows this is probably the last time she's going to see him, so maybe she wants to sort of see how he recounts the story, one last time sort of thing. But again, that is more me piecing it together than it being on a surface level.
Yeah, I mean, unfortunately, I wish I could engage with you on that level, but a lot of this stems back to the fact that I just think bringing her back to life was completely unnecessary, and you could have just left it. I think you could have just left it with her being dead, and then, like in Heaven Sent, you could have had flashes of memories of her appear in Hellbent.
Yes. Yeah, and don't get me wrong, I'd love to see a version of Hellbent where Clara does it. Like, I'd be all for it, absolutely.
Release the Snyder cut.
Release the Talele cut where Clara's not in it. Yeah, but I just think, I mean, ultimately, like, the whole notion of Clara being brought back, I personally can buy it for the reasons I mentioned earlier. But I will say, as I've mentioned earlier, for anyone who's like, "Oh, you're a Hellbent stan," like, again, a lot of that is me doing the sort of like headcanon work to piece it together, which I don't like. Some people don't. I don't mind doing it, but I will be honest and say that is what I'm. It's not there on a plate like you said with Waters on Mars. Yeah, so I enjoy it for what it is, but yes, I am doing some headcanon to do that. And you know what? Like, I know a lot of people don't like it, and that is completely fair. Like I said, all the reasons you mentioned, I can see it. I'm not in denial about it. Like, I completely understand why people say Hellbent doesn't work on several different levels. I buy it. But, if my brain switched off, I really enjoy it. If my brain switched on, I can still enjoy it. I just have to do a bit of gymnastics. The performances on, like, I think, again, Capaldi and Coleman, I'd argue, are on top form. Ashilda, not so much, as we mentioned. And some of the others. I think Donald Sumpter, bless his heart, was the wrong choice to play Rassilon.
I agree.
I know Timothy Dalton wasn't available, because I think it said they did ask him.
Oh, imagine if we had Timothy Dalton and Peter Capaldi. Oh,
that would have been so good. I think I read that they did. I think they did ask, and he either was busy or he said no. I can't remember which. But yeah, I just think out of all the actors you could have picked, I just don't think. Nothing against Donald Sumpter. I just don't think he was the right choice for this.
Imagine if you'd had like a standoff. This is just completely fan fiction right here. But imagine if you had a standoff of Peter Capaldi as the Doctor, Timothy Dalton as Rassilon, and Charles Dance as the Master.
Oh man, that would be so good. That would be. You're teasing me now. But even in the for anyone who's listened to the Gallifrey Time War series from Big Finish, Richard Armitage's Rassilon, even as a voice, holds so much presence. And
and
even
also,
if it had been him,
also what's his name? The guy who plays the Prime Minister in Rise of the Cybermen.
Don Warrington.
Don Warrington's Rassilon in Big Finish is probably my favorite Rassilon. I love Don Warrington's Rassilon. So good. It's
So nothing against the guy himself, but I just think for this stage of where Rassilon's at and the stakes, it was just the wrong choice. But but no. So see, people, I don't think Hellbent's a masterpiece. But I can watch both Heaven Sent and Hellbent one after the other.
Well, the funny thing is at the start of the Series 8 video, you said it was.
Well, no. Okay. I have watched it since we did that Series 8 video, I will say that.
Oh, really?
Yes, I have. I haven't done a full rewatch, but I've just... I get in those moods where, like, I watch odd episodes just because if it's on my mind and I just take my fancy, and Hellbent was one of them. I will say that I get as much enjoyment out of it as I do in Heaven Sent, though. Like, I could watch those two back to back and still there won't be that dip in entertainment value for me.
I will say, Rachel Talalay's direction is very good. I wouldn't say it's quite on par with Heaven Sent, but there's still some very good shots. Especially, I don't like the scene, but especially the direction in the bit where he finds a shielder. Like, that scene looks great.
Yeah. It looks gorgeous.
And also, I do like I said, Murray Gold's music in Heaven Sent's a masterpiece. But with Hellbent, there is one track I really like from Murray Gold, and that's the one called "A Duty of Care." I think that's a really strong track. So there are things I like about Hellbent. It's not completely irredeemable, but it's just the story that I don't like.
Yeah, it's like I said, the story for you doesn't work on like a. Well, on many levels.
Like you said about the performances, for me, because the actors lean into what happens so hard, as they should, obviously, because they put so much into it, it just... It's almost like the reverse of squeezing the lemons. Because like squeezing the lemons is like when you have a really good script and then actors act it harder and make it even better. Like that, for me, that's like... Army Ghost Doomsday is that, where the actors take the great script and make it even better with really intense performances. With Hellbent, it's kind of the opposite, where it's like they take a script I really don't like, and because they go all the way with it, it just makes it even worse to watch.
Okay, I hear you. Yeah.
And that's not saying that the performances are bad. Like, I'm not saying that would be ridiculous. But it's just I don't like the performances because of the story. You know what I mean?
Yeah. No, I hear you. I'd be like, I mean, I'm the opposite, personally, because as I said, some of the story beats I do like. Again, not without some headcanon, agreed, but I do like a moment for me that always hits is when Clara learns that the Doctor was trapped in the confession dial for 4 billion years.
Yeah.
Both her reaction to that and how the Doctor just sort, emphasizes how he was willing to do that for her. Just on a, because, we say to our best mates or ones we love, people say, things like, oh, I'd do this for you, I'd do that for you, I'd do anything, I'd take a bullet, all that sort of stuff. Mm-hmm. I don't know, for me, it was just sort of like, it was that, but the way they played it, I felt made that both so relatable and also very emotional. Especially if you've said some stuff like that to people or they've done it for you. Does that make sense? I just really like that.
I get what you're saying.
Yeah.
It sounds a bit like a Bruno Mars song, but I get what you're saying.
A little bit, yeah. But like, I don't know. I just like that moment when she finds out how long it is and when he explains why he does it. I just think it's a really sweet moment that isn't. It's not like necessarily bombastic either. It's not like grandiose. It's just a nice little moment they have together.
Yeah. Well, again,
before
like
the plot keeps moving.
The whole thing of like, why would you do that to yourself? I have the right to my death. That would work if what happened at the end didn't happen. If you know what I mean.
Yes. Again, this is better instance where it hit the most on first broadcast before the end showed up.
Yeah.
And I feel like that sort of summates my. I don't want to say I don't see Series 9 as a bad seat. Like I wouldn't label it as bad, like overall. But if I had to say anything, like it's like we've said all the way through. Series 9 is a season that I think I enjoyed the most on first broadcast. Like, I don't think I will ever enjoy it as much as I did when I watched it at the time.
Let me put it this way. Obviously, there's the 4 episodes I love, like Under the Lake Before the Flood, Face Raven, and Heaven Sent. But in terms of Series 9 as a whole, I think it's conceptually very interesting, which makes it better than some other series for me. However, in execution, I really, really, really don't like it, and so that drags it down.
Yeah, it's like this thing we've said all the way through, isn't it? That all these ideas or moments that on paper are really interesting.
Yeah, so
it's like that'd be really cool to explore.
Like, I can tell that Moffat put a lot of effort into it. I could tell that, like as opposed to say something like Series 7, where I feel like he phoned it in. If you get what I'm saying. And so for me, that does make some difference in that I have more respect for the work that was put into it because it feels more crafted and not slapped together. But I also disagree with the decisions that were made.
Yeah, no, yeah. I think at the end of the day, for me, like some people say to me, like, "Oh, why do you enjoy like Series 8 so much?" Or like, "Why do you enjoy Hellbent so much?" And I mean, like, these sort of things are different. Like where we're discussing it, we're reviewing it, we're tearing it apart. But like, especially when Jodie's era started, especially when they transmit, I like to watch Doctor Who and just try and have as much fun as I can. If you get me,
I get what you're saying.
so I think so. Like I say, if I'm just in the mood to watch Hellbent and I'm not feeling like ripping it apart, I can watch it and I really enjoy it. From a base entertainment value, I get a lot from it, and I think that's what I take from Series 9 as a whole. But I will absolutely throw my hands up and say, when we're doing things like this, like we've done in this video, where we're talking about it, we're talking about specific points, ripping it apart, I'm not going to just be like, oh yeah, but no, it's perfect. Do you know what I mean? Like, I'll happily rip it apart for its flaws. And I'll agree with you that it is that thing of conception but not execution. But yeah, I don't know. I just find it a really fun series to delve back into every now and then. But as I said, like, I don't think I'll ever find it as much fun as I did when I first watched it when it went out in 2015.
I suppose to round off this video with something a bit more positive, Husbands of River Song was a really nice surprise. Like,
Yes.
On paper, it sounds like I wouldn't like it. It's a Moffat Christmas special coming off Hellbent with River Song, and it's got drawn out comedy in it, and it's like got, there's a sexual joke about like a man's head being like removed and whatnot, and it's a lot of stuff, and you would think that it would be my nightmare, but actually I think it's really good.
No, it is really good. I think it's one of the best Christmas specials because it's just.
And this is like the opposite of Series 9, where I think it was like Husbands of River Song on paper sounds like a really bad idea, but the execution was really, really good.
Yeah, and I think part of that's just because obviously, like with a lot of Christmas specials, you're not necessarily worrying about a story arc. They're just having a bit of fun. Like, obviously it takes itself seriously in places, but it's not. It's not overly serious, and sometimes I think the Christmas specials can be a bit too jovial without any sort of stakes.
Well, I mean,
but
I find a lot of the Smith ones quite unbearable because they're quite mawkish and saccharine, especially like the Doctor, the Widow, and the Wardrobe. Ugh.
Yeah, that was the one that sprung to mind. But I think with Husbands of River Song, like, you have those moments of like just joy and a bit of silliness, but there is also some stakes, and obviously the ending is beautiful.
It's my favorite New Who special, like Christmas or like festive special, that isn't written by Russell T Davies.
Okay.
Yeah. I like it more than all the Moffat and Chibnall ones. I really like Husbands of River Song. It's great.
That's fair. I think it would rank outside of the RTD ones. I think it'd rank second for me, only behind Twice Upon a Time. But we'll get to that.
Okay, we'll get to that one.
Trepidation already.
Yeah.
I'm one of the few people who, again, like, has its flaws, and we'll get to that. But for the most part, really enjoys Twice Upon a Time.
Well, we'll get to Twice Upon a Time. The one thing I was going to say is the only thing I don't like about Husbands is I think Nardol's a bit useless.
Yeah, and it's sad in a way, isn't it? Because obviously he would go on to be a companion, which I guess wasn't the intention at the time, and it's this what if thing, isn't it? Like, say if he didn't become a companion, would he be a bit more? Would he be a bit more enjoyable knowing it was just that one story? Because, as you say, like when you look at Series 10 Nardole and Husbands Nardole, like it's night and day, isn't it? So yeah.
Well, I mean, if you look at Wilfred in Voyage of the Damned, it's like a caricature of his actual character in Series 4.
Oh, exactly. Yeah. But again, that's all like hindsight, isn't it? It's the whole, we'll now make this person like an important character. So I kind of forgive it on that level, but I do know what you mean. He is a bit spare parts.
But on the whole, I really liked it, and I think it just sort of highlighted to me exactly what I didn't like about River Song and Matt Smith's era, because I just don't think that Matt Smith was the right Doctor for her. And I know that's a hot take to some people, but I really like her with Tennant and Capaldi. I think they work really well. Like, obviously in Silence in the Library, it's all like he doesn't know her yet, and because Tennant has such a deep emotional core. When he like starts to figure out who she is, the way he responds to her, I find really believable. Even though he doesn't know who she is yet, he trusts her. And then
Absolutely.
And then also with Capaldi, I feel like they pulled off like the old married couple really well. And I think they have great chemistry. Just unfortunately, it just doesn't work for Matt Smith for me. He was just the wrong doctor to have a romantic interest, I think.
Yeah, no, I hear you, and I like the whole thing, like the ending of Husbands, like again, is so beautiful, and I think that could have only really worked to the extent it did with Capaldi's Doctor, not necessarily Matt Smith's Doctor, or even David Tennant's Doctor. I just feel like Capaldi's Doctor was the right Doctor to tie that bow with.
Yeah,
and I know, like.
And I will say, at the time of Hellbent Broadcasting, I was very angry at Doctor Who. So
a lot of people were, don't worry.
And I was considering giving it up, even though I loved Heaven Sent. I was so angry at what happened that I was like, I don't know if this show is for me anymore. But Husbands of a Song gave me a little glimmer of hope, and I thought, you know what, I'm going to give Series 10 a go, and my thoughts on Series 10, you'll all find out next time.
Little tease, yeah. No, Series 10's a funny one for me. I'm actually in the past few weeks because it has been ages, so I started rewatching it again. So I don't know how far I'll be by the time we talk again, but I remember most of it. So yeah, I'll be interested to hear what you have to say on it. Really,
yeah. But that was a good 3 hours.
Hey, we clocked 3 hours again.
Yeah, we did it. It seems like the natural time.
Yeah, well, it's nice, isn't it, just to not put constraints on it and just let us talk for however long we want. So
I also, in this video, something I'm really proud of, I think, is that I tried to tackle areas that I hadn't already covered on my channel before. Like, there's obviously some things I had to repeat, but I tried to dig further than things that I'd already said to make it a bit more fresh. So yeah, I'm happy about that.
No, that's good, man. And I hope I articulated with the points where, like, say with Hellbent, I hope I articulated why I enjoy it, but also respecting why you see it the way you do, and how I see it how I do. So no, I've like Series 8. I enjoyed it. It's been a good chat.
Yeah, I think we actually agreed on more than I expected.
Yeah, I think we disagreed on more in Series 8, didn't we, than we did in this one, which is funny because I'd argue Series 9 arguably is more divisive than Series 8 on on the whole from what I've seen.
Yeah.
So yeah.
I suppose maybe it's I don't know. I don't know what the answer is. I gotta come with it. But that was a lot of fun, and I'm looking forward to part 3 when we conclude it with Series 10, which will be a very interesting one because I like Series 10, but I do have some things to say.
Likewise, pretty much. So, okay, we've got the same sort of thing going in, but it depends on what areas we. And
I think I think maybe once we do Series 10, it'll give me a good opportunity to sort of sum up the era as a whole, if that makes sense.
Likewise, because
the context will all be there. But yeah, this has been so fascinating to talk about. I'm honestly considering, based on how well this has gone, I'm trying to. In my mind, it would be great if conversations like this could happen about like other eras as well.
Oh man, that'd be ace. Like any era, any story, that'd be so good.
Yeah, like I'm kind of just hoping that these kind of conversations is stuff that not only that I and you have as well, but also like just I hope other people watch these videos and it kind of encourages this sort of discussion, this like really healthy, dive into these areas and also going like real in depth. So I think this is the most interesting thing for me is like going really in depth.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think it's just like we said, I think in the last one, just like you said, inspiring healthy conversation and just, being willing to listen to each other in a way, even if you don't agree, like your knee jerks not to agree, just, hear each other out and then just talk about it.
Yep. All right. So anything you want to say before we finish off the video?
Well, first of all, thank you for having me back, Chatterbox of England. If you enjoyed what we had to say, come and check out my channel if you like, Adam Martin on YouTube with a Y, and I'm on Twitter as well, Adam Martin Actor, if you want to see my daily ramblings or posting patronising comments I get on YouTube. So follow me for that. But yeah, that's about it. And yeah.
Right, yeah, thanks for coming on. This is once again has been a fantastic conversation, and I'm really looking forward to when we cap it off with part 3. Fantastic. We'll see you all next time for Series 10.
See you later.